Okay, so Nikki, we don't expect Michelle or Vanessa.
Michelle is on this call. We are going to be missing Gretchen and Vanessa today, to my
Okay.
understanding.
Oh, I see you, Michelle. Sorry about that.
And James Bentley just mentioned that unfortunately, with three small children at home, he's had to reboot his router really quick. So he may be just a minute or two late.
Right. Well, we'll give him just a second and then call to order. I will warn you all in advance. I have two small children doing e-learning at home today as well. So you may have cameo appearances by elementary students at some point today. They'll be, grabbing technology during their lunch break and all things like that. Nikki, I'm watching for James, but if you see him pop on, let me know. And then once
Sure
he
thing.
we'll get started.
And Chairperson, it will show up as Nicole Horniak as a host as well. For some reason, WebEx is a little wonky with James's account, but it does look like he's joining us. But it may take a minute for the video to pop on.
I'm sure he won't mind if I call him Nicole.
Go ahead.
All right. Well, then I'd like to officially call to order the December 10th meeting of the Indiana Charter School Board. Quickly, the first order of business is the approval of the October 16th meeting's minutes. Any changes or questions from the board? Okay, hearing none, then we'll take a roll call vote on approval of those minutes. Calvin? Was that a yes?
Hear me now?
There we go.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Dylan?
Yes.
Goff? Kramer?
Yes.
Ruger?
Yes.
Rummel?
Yes.
And Preston's a yes. The minutes are approved. So then moving on to the meat of today's meeting, as you all know, we've got a significant agenda today. So I'd like to turn it over to James to kick us off.
All right. And 1 second, let me pull up I am having internet issues today. It could be the 3 kids on the internet at the same time. So please bear with. Let me just open.
As long as we can hear you, James, we're good.
Everything's so slow. Okay, yes, today we are considering four renewal applications. Before we get into the actual renewal recommendations, I'm not going to reread the memo we provide you on. Keep freezing.
Yeah, and you're cutting in and out.
Geez. Okay, I apologize. Please let me know. I can try to switch to my phone.
Well, if need be, if you can dial, I mean, let's try, and then if it doesn't work, you can always dial in on your phone and we can just listen.
Yeah. So, let me try turning off video and see if that helps. Okay. Can you hear me now? Does that help? Okay. So I'm not going to reread the memo. The memo essentially gives you a little bit of history about the last several years of state accountability, which has been basically changed every year. I mean, you can even go farther back than we did to the change in Indiana state standards and the change in the ISTEP test, back in, I guess, 14, 15 and 15, 16. But the impact of the change from ISTEP to iLearn and then the actual lack of a test from last year has had a, sort of a cataclysmic effect on our ability to actually track academic data. It was going to be tough. This year was going to be 18, 19 year. The rollout was less than spectacular. It was a complete change in modality. There was a lot of confusion about how the test was going to be. The kids had no. She cannot hear James. Am I not loud enough?
We can hear you.
Okay, Dr. Calvin apparently cannot hear me. Can you hear me now, Dr. Calvin? Yes?
It's better.
Okay, I'll hold the microphone up to my mouth. So the long and the short of it is that we are not going to, I just do not feel comfortable holding schools accountable to our academic success metrics for this renewal cycle. And as you can see in the memo, this is going to go on probably for the next couple of years, because, and I don't want to go too much into detail with answer any questions that you might have on her graphs and various things, but to be honest, the last year for which we have reliable data is like 17, 18, which was year 2 for these schools. And so, as you can see from the recommendation itself, we really don't spend a whole lot of time talking about their academic performance. This sort of ties in with the legislature, who also recognized hold harmless for all schools in Indiana. So that being said, I'm going to move forward into our renewal recommendations, and we're going to do them in alphabetical order according to the agenda, even though they don't actually appear that way on the recommendation sheet, and for that I apologize. So the first one is ACE the strategy here. So we have 3 schools that are in somewhat similar positions, and that is that these are schools that started in either year 1 or year 2 with either a different leadership team completely. So the current leadership and board is dealing with situations that they were not privy, that they did not make. For example, they're in a lease situation of the original founder who can't hear anything. Who is that?
I think you're okay, James.
Okay, I just heard someone say they can't hear anything. Anyway, um, so ACE prep, yes, don't. ACE prep off than they had hoped for. They were a slow growth school, starting out with kindergarten. So from the very beginning, they had to make significant adjustments based on their enrollment, which was, I believe you were funded for 33 students in your first year, which was much less than you had anticipated. And that caused a significant shift in your academics, presented in your charter. However, every subsequent year, they have grown, and due to actions taken by the school leader, one specific example is bringing a pre-K program directly into the school, caused their enrollment to significantly increase from 1819 to 1920. Wait, is that correct? Yes. Um, Now, in Prep's case, the pandemic directly impacted their enrollment. Their pre-K program, which was their feeder, had to close down, and so they literally lost a kindergarten class. Probably, I'll let Anna can explain in more detail, but they essentially lost an entire kindergarten class because of the pandemic. So that is a direct effect of the pandemic on their enrollment. And so when area of concern with the school, they were well on their way toward executing a plan that they had put into place to, I guess, right the ship, as it were, based on, their low enrollment. But for the pandemic, would probably be a lot closer this year than they are. And we, after speaking to all of the various folks who are involved. Brian Anderson is on the call, and he can answer specific questions. All this does is delay their plan by a year. And that's assuming that things sort of go back to normal and we can, get enrollment back up. So with regards to ACE Prep, we really have no immediate concerns about the school's finances. We are sympathetic to the problems that the pandemic has caused them directly. And things normalize, that they can continue on this thoughtful plan that they have to sort of fix their debt situation and eventually purchase the building. Brian can answer specific questions when board members, when we get to that part of it. Other than that, they've also somewhat modified their organizational structure to address the only other issue that we had with ACE Prep, which was it had to do with how lean their operation, just out of necessity, how lean their operation was. They've been very conservative with expenditures, and what that really translates into is low staff numbers. And so when you're wearing a lot of hats, again, I would hope that your primary goal would be educating children and not fulfilling reporting requirements, regardless of the fact that reporting requirements are important. And so I think we've gotten to solve that problem. And so with that, our recommendation as a staff is for a full renewal, 5-year renewal. And I want to say a little something about that recommendation. I do not it's the one time I actually agreed with Mark Giaquina, and I'm just going to say that back in the day when he brought up the whole idea of why do we do conditional renewals? It's like either we renew or we don't renew. It's like if you have issues, why are we conditionally renewing them? And in that, I agree with him, because the all renewal is basically telling potential lenders and the various other people involved in the school, parents, enrollment, that we're not really sure. And it doesn't help the school in any way, shape, or form. And all it does is hurt the school, actually. And the fact of the matter is that we as a staff can bring a recommendation to close a school or put a school on a corrective action plan anytime we sense that there's an issue with them on our accountabilities. We can't here. Say this once because this is going to apply to the other recommendations as well. That is the reason for the full 5-year conditional renewal. And with that, I'm going to stop talking. I guarantee, I promise that the next introductions of the other renewals are going to be less wordy. I just wanted to lay that out because that's sort of going to be a template for at least 3 out of the 4 schools that we're going to talk about today. So with that, I will turn it over to ACE Prep to and
Thank you, James. My name is John Schertzer. I am a founding board member of ACE Prep and was asked to sort of start us off today in our discussion about the school. I just want to thank you for the opportunity to address you today and for the trust that this body gave us 5 years ago to launch ACE Prep. Hundreds of families later, I think it was a very wise investment on your behalf. We appreciate the diligent and thorough effort conducted by the ICSB staff. We're very appreciative that they are recommending a 5-year extension of our charter. It was 5 years ago that we presented to you the concept, vision, and plan for ACE Prep. At that time, it was an idea, and now it's very much a living, breathing, and succeeding member of the educational community in the city. I served as the board chair for the first 3 years, and there were definitely moments in which we were challenged by the economic realities of starting a new school. And just as we had turned the corner, as James referenced, COVID-19 paused our upward trajectory on our enrollment and financial success. We've learned a lot over these last 5 years, and discomfort and strain are excellent teachers. I am proud that while the board focused on these issues, the classroom education was as strong and as consequential as we had expected under Ms. Schultz's leadership. Note that we have had 0 turnover in the administration team since we were here before you. Our internal academic measures have showed substantial progress over these past several years. And I appreciate that in your position, you want to have confidence that any school you charter will be successful. Plans, projections, budgets, those things can bring about success. But nothing should give you more confidence than the fact that we have struggled at times and we persevered. It's now in our culture on the board, within the staff, throughout the school, to never quit. Culture is much more powerful than planning, and I think our planning is still pretty good. And it also should be noted that mission creep is a very real thing that can happen when schools struggle economically. They might want to dabble in other things that are outside their mission or go for shiny objects that try to improve their standing. But we have not done that. We have stayed 100% committed to our mission without waiver. And I say with confidence that because of our past, our ability to weather the storms, and our continued relentlessness to provide our scholars with the best literacy and character education we can, we are a wise investment for another 5 years. You can trust this team. And with that, I want to pass it over to our head of school, Anna Schultz, who can talk to you a little bit more about ACE Prep.
Good morning, everybody. I feel like I'm doing a math lesson or a reading lesson. I came into a classroom. I'm looking at a screen of little Zoom faces. It's so nice to see everybody. Those of you that I haven't met, my name is Anna Schultz. I'm the founder and head of school at ACE Prep. 2 titles that I'm super honored to have and really wear proudly. The last time I stood before you, it was my 40th birthday to the day. And while I thought it would be quite impossible to top the birthday gift of a school, The last 5 years have taught me that it's not about the actual entity that was the gift that you gave me, but instead what you were really gifting me was just a life lesson in a mere 5 years on actualizing each of our 7 core values, which serve as the pillars of our school culture in ways that define our decisions and that support our actions. So we've shown bravery in making difficult choices, be they about finances or staffing issues, to ensure our mission is obtained long term. We've shown enthusiasm. Just this morning, we celebrated 12 of 14 first graders attending their morning meeting via Zoom. We recognized a third grader this morning that has already passed a reading test to close her gap to not 2 years behind anymore, but 1. We've celebrated 3 first graders, I think in the last 25 minutes, that have already met their end of the year reading targets on December 10th. And since then, academics continue to be a driver of the things we get enthusiastic about here. We've shown growth, quite literally, as James mentioned, be that 8% increase in enrollment from year 3 to year 4. And on the dashboard that ICSB puts together, exceeding our targets for re-enrollment was shown to be a strength of ours. We've also shown responsibility by being super transparent, continuing to operate in a transparent manner. I have been told by the ICSB team many times that I'm one of the few school leaders that willingly invites the team in to walk around and to check us out and to help to make us better. We've shown endurance, like quite literally. I'm sure we all have endurance tattoos somewhere on our bodies. We have defined what it means to persevere every day and in every way. We started out on our first day of school, year 1, with 8 scholars. We ended with 32 on the last day of school. So the headline of ACE Prep quadruples their population in 1 year is something that we're proud of, even though we ended with 32. We've shown achievement by increasing our percentage of scholars in Tier 1 by 55% in reading and 66% in math. That was last year alone in a pandemic. And we've shown team, be it in ways that we collaborate as a staff, either during weekly professional development opportunities or ways we support our families and the local community. So you put all these values together and they spell out the words "be great." And today is really a pivotal turning point for us. It's when the work really starts to change. We've spent 5 years working to define what does it mean to be great. But as we look ahead, now it's about actualizing that with excellence in everything we do, which is the portion of our mission statement that we took as our motto for this school year. So now we have knowledge with every grade level that we serve, as the slow growth model has finally capped out at year 5. We look ahead and we hone in on our academic targets. We analyze curricular choices differently. We align coaching and developmental supports for our team and our teachers accordingly to really define that academic culture. No longer are we figuring it out as we go. We've also hit a point of staffing stability. On the call today is Mrs. Carisha Adams. She was our founding manager of operations and has transitioned to a director of operations role. And we take really proudly that we were here when the building was drywall, and we are still here now. So at the end of the day, it's enrollment that what matters the most. And took the opportunity to resubmit enrollment numbers at the guidance of the ICSB team. I believe the first budget that you saw that we submitted was based on non-COVID numbers. Since we have realigned those enrollment targets, today we're sitting at 166. We have a kindergartner that I believe is starting today. And our target for next year is 213, which we are confident that we can hit. We are working hard, really hard and really diligently every day, regardless if our delivery model is via Zoom or in Princeton University, as I am in now, to make sure that every minute matters and to continue to place our families on a trajectory towards college success. To help doing that and to help ground us in strong financial decisions, I would like to introduce to you Brian Anderson. Brian serves as our external consultant when it comes to all things finance accounting for both Mrs. Adams and myself and our board of directors.
Hi, everybody. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Okay. I'll keep this very, very short. So the finances have been touched on. The finances at ACE are critical. We have been working so hard, the entire board, Anna, Carisha, for the last 3 years, really working on a plan that I'll share the highlights of very briefly. And I think, as James said earlier, I think it was delayed by a year this year. So ACE Prep is they've been operating in a tight cash position for their entire existence. And it's because of the low enrollment in year one. So we had a plan to get them financially healthy was to eliminate, they had a line of credit, which is essentially like a maxed out credit card with National Bank of Indianapolis, which is a great partner, and still is a great partner, but had that and carried it for over 2 years without making a dent in it. Came up with a plan to refinance that into a different type of working capital debt with a charter organization. We did that and shaved the debt by about $50,000. Then we were going to trim that debt halfway by December 31, and then the rest of it was going to be paid off by the end of this year, and then convert that into permanent debt by purchasing the facility, which is not as crazy as it sounds, and I can answer questions on that. There's actually good reason to think that we will be able to purchase the facility and we'll be able to get finance for it. So that would have happened if we had hit 215 students this year. We did not. I have every reason to believe that I actually have run numbers. We run numbers all the time for future projections. And I actually have numbers that are less than what have been even given to you just in a worst case scenario. And basically we know the numbers we need to hit. We get the 225 students and we're in a very solid position with the facility that we're in. And I think we will be able to do that within 2 years without a lot of problems. So, but I'm happy, I'm here. I won't take up the time, but I'm happy to answer any questions if they come up about the finances.
Thank you, Brian. This is
I
Shelley
switched
Tom.
to, oh, sorry. I just wanted to check to see if you all could hear me now. I switched to call-in. Okay, I'll mute now.
Hello, this is Shelley Thomas. I am the current board chair for ACE Prep. And I just want to do a quick conclusion to our presentation. As you have seen in the data and from those that have already spoke prior to me, ACE has persevered some difficulties over the last 5 years, but I think that is what has made us so strong. We know how to figure it out. I mean, that is kind of our motto. We'll figure out a way to make it happen and make it work. We're solid right now in our enrollment. Our academics is amazing. Our finances are in a good place. So we can only expect it to be great going forward because that's what we do, is be great. We appreciate you allowing us to speak on the behalf of our organization, and we would welcome any questions you may have at this time.
Great. And just before we dive into further discussion, I'm sure some of our board members will have questions, but I just want to thank our ICSB staff for all of their work in preparing us for today's meeting and the due diligence of, sorting through the challenges posed by the pandemic and the changes in assessments and accountability over recent years and how those impact today's decisions. And I know James said this, but I just want to reiterate in case anyone didn't hear him clearly. As a reminder, the board has the opportunity to take action on any school at any point, not just at these specific decision points in the renewal process or otherwise. So whether a school is renewed for 1 or 100 years, it doesn't prevent the board from taking other action at any given point. So with that, I'd love to open it for questions from the board.
I simply said I have not one question.
That's fantastic. Anyone? Okay.
Hey,
Well,
Kim.
Kim, I
Yes.
do have questions. You're not
Okay.
surprised. I know. I always have questions.
I was surprised when I didn't hear from you. So
Uh, James, the question I have, and the questions I have are really not just on ACE Prep. They're a little bit more global. So I don't want it to feel like I'm just heaping on them because they're really about several of the schools, but they just come now because they're first. My question, which is relevant to what Kim just said, which was helpful, is in terms of, I see on this, and I think it was Hyatt also maybe, where it says, if it ever becomes clear that enrollment is decreasing or not increasing fast enough to the point where the school is in financial stress, staff will ensure that action is taken in a timely manner to ensure the least amount of harm to the school students. And as the other board members know, I am a former charter school parent who did go through a very painful and very abrupt charter school closing. So whenever I'm in these meetings, I very much have on the hat of a charter school parent. What does that statement mean, and how much notice would be given to parents if something had to happen? In our case, we received about 3 weeks notice with no other schools with openings. And I know that you won't do that, but what might that look like for these schools if something did have to happen?
So can you hear me?
I can.
Ma'am?
You're loud and clear.
Okay, great. Sorry for my technical difficulties. So what that means essentially is, we get quarterly reports, and while I'm not going to bore you with that, as our school leaders will tell you, we've, I wouldn't say significantly modified our quarterly report, but we've revised our quarterly report to really make it more robust and to collect more data, including, which we weren't really doing before, tracking the changes from ADM, from the estimated ADM to actual September ADM to reconciled ADM, both in September and February. And we are now actually requiring our boards to do revised budgets, both in Q1 and in Q3, I believe, when those reconciled numbers are known. So what this does is not only forces the boards to revisit their budget based on enrollment, which is the strongest drive, which is obviously the biggest driver of revenue. It also gives us an opportunity to, dig in, each quarter to see how the school's doing. And that's expenses versus revenue and all of that. At the same time, when I say that we will be in close contact, I mean we'll be in close contact with school leaders. We'll be monitoring RT, which is the real-time reports, which, while, they're not the ones that we use to determine funding. That's the ME, and the ME is really those 2 count dates. But the RT gives us an idea of where the school is on a weekly basis in terms of enrollment. And then further, at least with regard to ACE Prep, they're also part of Enroll Indy. We have Enroll Indy data as well with regards to, number of applications submitted, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we will have a pretty good idea, or as good of an idea as one can have, about what the enrollment is looking like. Now, as you know, as well as I do, that what enrollment may look like in the summer may not be what actually happens on day one. There's not a lot we can do about that, because if students decide not to show up, they just decide not to show up. But we do have sort of formulas that we use for attrition and various other things based on just history. So by way of background, that is how we plan on monitoring sort of how these schools are doing from an enrollment standpoint. And why that's important is that then factors into the plans that Brian described, the plans that Steel City have, the plans that Hyatt have. And then we also look at what sort of supports they have in terms of, say in the case of Hyatt, their relationship with Eve, the PLA management company, and certain supports that they may get from Eve, and then make a decision. Now, obviously, we have closed 5 schools, I think, and all of those but one were done in an orderly manner at the end of the year. And the one was before your time, was Early Career Academy. And remind me, Bridget, was that like in their first year, maybe even? And they were a disaster. I mean, that was they were approved pre our time. We inherited them. They were run by one of the, I'm going to say, for-profit colleges that went bankrupt or something. So that was one of those things. I won't say that's an act of God, but like the way that school closed, there was nothing we could have done about it, because all of the stuff happened once the school year started. But it did make us very sensitive to, and it only impacted 16 students. So I'm not saying that those 16 students weren't impacted, but that taught us a lesson about why we do not want schools to close in the middle of the year, and why, when we were looking at all of the information for this year, we really were focusing on 2 questions. One, what is the future financial outlook and the drivers of that future financial outlook? And 2, is the school in imminent danger of closing? Is it going to close this year? Do we think it will close next year? And when I say take action to ensure that the students are impacted, I mean orderly closure. That's what I mean. And we will do everything in our power. Trust me, I've closed 5 schools, and I think we've rejected. There was another school that we rejected a charter transfer request, and all of them are heartbreaking and horrible. And the students don't necessarily understand what's happening. And trust me, it's the least favorite part of my job. But there's nothing worse than having that happen with no warning. One of the other things that we're going to do, just on that note, is move our fall cycle up to October, so that schools that are in Indianapolis can fully take advantage of Enroll Indy. In other words, we want to give our schools every chance to succeed and give them every opportunity to get the enrollment that they need to continue to exist. But at the first sign that there's trouble, and using every reporting tool at our disposal, including but not limited to the DOE reports, our financial reports, and our conversations with school leaders and their financial advisors and financial CFOs on their boards and various things like that, will not hesitate to pull the trigger to close a school if it looks like to close a school pre-opening if it looks like it's not going to make it through the year. Can I guarantee you that that's not going to happen 3 weeks before? I cannot. I'm just being honest. But we will, in every way, shape, and form, try to make sure that does not happen. And then when we, as part of our closure process, our number one priority is ensuring that students find other schools. And we will leverage every relationship that we have to ensure that that can happen. So hopefully that answers your question. I, like you went through it, with your child. I've gone through it 6 times, and it sucks each time. And I really, for me, it's heartbreaking, and I sincerely hope we never have to do it again. I think that's wishful thinking, but in this point, my thoughts are always out to what's best for the students and not the adults, and they're hard decisions to make, but we will make them.
Thanks, James. That's helpful. What I would suggest, and that is all helpful, and that's the way it should be. What I would suggest is the piece of this that I think that we're leaving out of our process in general, and again, this goes beyond ACE Prep, is that we know, and you know, and the boards of the schools very well know what their financial condition is and what that means for the future, and are very carefully weighing options and strategies and working really hard to make it all work. The piece that doesn't know are parents who are making decisions, either parents already in the school or parents that are looking at various options and deciding where to go. When a parent chooses a school, they assume they assume that they're all stable and they can all take their child. And some are, and some are working really hard and might make it and might not. And I'm a firm believer that a parent with a public school has a right to know that. And so what I would continue to encourage, as I have at past times, is that all schools need to be posting their minutes, and which would include some of those conversations, on their website where any parent can read them. And that's why I think that's so important for us to have that transparency. Most
Marianne,
parents don't realize that.
and Marianne, you will be happy to know that
Oh, good.
I don't know if it was a month ago or 2 months ago, I sent an email to all of our schools called it was a governance memo, and it was a sort of a walking through the obligations of every single board. And in that memo, it requires board members, or sorry, charter organizers, to make their sort of board presence readily available on their website. In other words, I don't want to see a link that's buried within a link that's buried within a link, and you have to click four times to get to the board, a list of board meetings and board minutes. And that boards are required to post their notice on their front page. They're required to post their agendas, their minutes, and all of that, in a, I would say at most one link away from their front page, maybe two, depending on the way their website is set up. But this went out, a month or two ago. It may take a little while for all schools to get into compliance because some use programs like charter boards or not board on track. I forget what the other one's called, but there are a few programs that make that easier. Some are doing it on their own. Actually uploading the documents, but one of our goals in the next year is to ensure that kind of transparency is exists for each one of our schools. They've already been required to have the meetings. They've already been required to provide us with the minutes, but now we are requiring them to make those minutes. And I know you've brought this up before, and the memo was partially in response to your request, and also partially because it was something that we've been thinking about doing, but we just sort of pushed it forward in this time of a pandemic where, you don't have access to the school if the school's not open, and boards are meeting more frequently because they can, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So hopefully that addresses some of your concerns.
That
like
makes
I said,
me very happy. I'm glad to hear that.
the next thing is just ensuring compliance, and we're going to work on that just as soon as we have time. But that is something that we are emphasizing. It was part of the whole redoing of the financial workbook, the new accountability system, and just increased transparency. So,
good. Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions from board members? Leslie?
I have, Marianne just prompted me to ask a question too. The partnership I thought was brilliant with your pre-K program. I was just wondering, since they closed, what did you all do or have you done anything to try to make a connection and keep that connection with those students in that pre-K program, or are they still in contact with their students? Because that says a lot to me about you all, that you were able to grow because of that partnership.
Mhm.
So can anybody elaborate on where you all are with that particular program?
Yeah, I'm happy to, Ms. Thorne. I am right now in a classroom as opposed to my office because pre-K is back in session, I'm happy to say, and their classroom is right above my office. And so you would have heard alphabet songs. Like it's a lovely, joyful sound, but a distraction during these meetings. So they closed, I think, to be quite transparent with you, ma'am, I think part of the reason they closed was out of respect to us because the building was closed as well. So we're not bringing their scholars into our building and then creating mixed messages for families, which I appreciated. However, the pre-K operates on a more traditional, like a daycare sort of a schedule, right? So they're open all summer long. They don't take as long of breaks that we do. So the building is constantly has this kind of pathway of families coming in and out. I will say too that the pre-K provider has set his school hours around our school hours. So when I'm standing outside every morning pre-pandemic and shaking every scholar's hands, his pre-K students are coming in the same doorway as ours. We know them, we know their families. We try to make them a part of the ACE Prep culture as soon as we can. And the relationship, honestly, ma'am, is rather symbiotic because we are constantly enrolling scholars that have siblings who are ages 3, 4, or 5, right? So it feeds us both ways. So as much as we have a desire, a genuine desire, obviously, to have that program in our building, I believe from his perspective, the provider's perspective, he wants to be here as well because it's helping grow his numbers too, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question?
Yes. And then the last question, because I was a teacher. And so just looking from a teacher perspective, I know what it felt like to lose coworkers as a result of school finances. So I want to anybody just talk about what you do. What are you doing for your teachers in the event, because it is a reality of the shortfalls that all of us are experiencing because of COVID and because of the drop in enrollment. But that's a great concern for me too. But I just wanted whether a teacher or somebody can elaborate on just the environment that you are creating in the, in respect to the possibility of losing people.
Yes, I will say that was the hardest day, not just within our 5 years, but probably one of the hardest days of my life, honestly. We had all of our board meetings are obviously open and transparent, but we had really hard conversations within the first 3 or 4 months of operation when we saw enrollment numbers year one as what they were. And like a naive school leader, at the very beginning, I hired based on what we thought our projected targets would be, not based on actual enrollment numbers, which put us in a position year one to have to make those really hard decisions and terminate positions as opposed to eliminating people on the team because of performance or whatever the case may be. We were fortunate enough, and I say this in, I don't know, in a way that I hope doesn't make me sound conceited or arrogant, but I'm pretty well connected in the city with other schools and school districts. And so those conversations when we had to let folks go was also backed by I know in Perry Township, they are looking for a first grade teacher. Here would be a potential opportunity. So we tried to create pathways that first year that would help to set our teachers up for success. And I very much worded my conversations with them as, the reason you were a part of the ACE Prep team is because you were mission aligned and you are a phenomenal educator. At this time, I just don't have 20 first graders to give you, but there's 20 first graders over here at this particular school that are looking for a teacher just like you. So we ensured that they landed all well and safe. Moving forward from year 2 on, to be blunt with you, ma'am, I just changed our hiring process and the timeline for that. So instead, we hire based on when numbers dictate that, as opposed to what we put on a spreadsheet and submit dictates. And that has really changed the culture. The bind that can get you in sometimes is I'm willing to let, a strong interview maybe go because I don't have the numbers at that particular point in time. So then the strategy becomes, how do you continue to nurture that relationship How do you bring current staff members who are part of the ACE press team? How do you involve them in the hiring decisions? And each year we've revamped our hiring and our HR process to involve more staff members more and more. And so, there's always obviously room to grow, but when you have a slow growth model, ma'am, my goodness, we're hiring all the dang time, right? Because each year we're adding on. And so this is the first year that we've reached K-5 full capacity, but I feel like our staffing model has settled, for lack of a better term. And rest is not the right word, but we have been able to rest a little bit in the sense that we are now fully staffed. And so you can work on elements of the staff culture that allow them to understand your job is protected. And we can teach, I can teach a scholar to read with a phone book, right? It's not about all the bells and whistles. So you just prioritize staff and you make hard decisions in other ways in order to protect that portion of our budget, and just constant conversations with Brian and his team to make sure that payroll is a priority each and every month, as it has been, without an issue.
I appreciate your response.
Thank you for your question.
You're welcome.
You'll have to come visit.
Thank you,
Teachers
Leslie.
are always welcome.
Any other board questions? Okay, I would entertain a motion to accept the staff recommendation for approval of a full renewal.
I'll make that motion.
Okay.
That we approve the renewal of ACE Prep for the staff recommendation.
Thanks, Janet. Do I have a second?
I'll second, Kim.
Thanks, Leslie. All right, then I will call the roll. Dr. Calvin.
Support.
Dylan.
Yes.
Goff.
Yes.
Kramer.
Yes.
Ruger.
No.
Rummel.
Yes.
And Preston. Yes, motion passes. 6-1. Thank you. Congratulations, ACE Prep.
Congrats, Anna.
Chair
Thank you so
Preston, do you
much.
mind if I just make a quick announcement? For ACE Prep members, if you would like to stay on, you are more than welcome. Otherwise, you don't have an obligation. Correct, Ms. Chair Preston? Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
James, would you like to introduce the next?
Yes, moving on, we sort of enter into an existential crisis for me as to whether the comes before Higher Institute of Arts and Technology, because it is Excel Center. Does the count? Do you count the when you're doing alphabetical order? Thoughts?
I say no.
Okay, all right, then we're going to go to Higher Institute of Arts and Technology. I apologize, Betsy, and the Excel Center team. Oh wait, no, if it doesn't count, then it is the Excel Center. I step back. Okay, so we're going to go to the Excel Center Shelbyville.
But that does not mean to me that we don't need these videos to.
Okay. Excel Center Shelbyville. Once again, we are recommending approval for a full renewal. One of the differences with the adult high schools is that we do actually have some data for them because they're on a different accountability model, and we track different things. The one thing I would like to point out to you, as you look at the little table that's in their academic success box, is that they are graduating students, and their adult high school graduation rate calculation is, as expected, high. The one effect the pandemic has had on them is their CCR rate in 2019, 2020. As you can see, it was over 90 and up to 100% in previous years. And the pandemic literally made it impossible for some students to pursue certificates. So I am not making any sort of assumptions about the CCR rate in 1920 because that was solely due to the pandemic. I think it's critical to note, as with all Excel centers, over 90% of their graduates earned a Core 40 or a Core 40 with honors diploma, which is the whole point of the Excel centers and why it is different from adult basic education. And I feel like I have to keep making that point over and over again. The one thing that I want to point out too with them, I mean, obviously organizational compliance, we have no issues whatsoever. It has always been a delightful to work with the Excel centers, both with the local administrative teams and with the network. They are very responsive. I used to, before the pandemic, had monthly meetings with the network folks to discuss issues and things like that. So no concerns there. They actually, the explanation for their financial health, they actually submitted a budget that we told them that they needed to redo because the budget was too honest. And by that, I mean, they submitted a budget that showed how expensive it was to operate an adult high school in a small town with a small enrollment. Now, it's the problem is the budget isn't really reflective of how the school operates within the network. We totally appreciated the fact that they submitted that budget, but it wasn't really reflective. What it does show is that Goodwill Education Initiative, I mean, this is a nonprofit entity that is interested in getting high school dropouts Core 40 diplomas. And they have mentioned to us on more than one occasion, and this is a perfectly good example of this, their willingness to quote unquote subsidize some of their smaller schools to continue to provide this service in these underserved areas. I mean, the need is there, they're at capacity. And the fact that the way that they subsidize, quote unquote, subsidize this is just to pull back what their sort of, I guess, management fee would be due to the network to get them to the black. Now, it just is a sort of a test, in my mind, is not a negative. It's a positive. It's a testament to their the commitment to serving areas that wouldn't otherwise be served because it doesn't make financial sense. And they did, their budget was, very conservative. It acknowledged the potential state funding reductions, flatlining of federal revenues. I mean, all of these things to me indicate that they understand the challenges and they understand the what they've got in Excel Shelbyville. And I think that if they can, the analysis shows that if they can continue to maintain their current enrollment, that they will eventually get there to where the subsidy, the quote unquote subsidy from Goodwill, and they can explain it better than I can, how that actually works, will eventually be unnecessary. So we are recommending a full 5-year renewal for Shelbyville with no concerns. And with that, I'll turn it over to the Excel Center folks.
Thank you, James. Appreciate that introduction. I'm the Vice President of Mission Education of Central and Southern Indiana, and I serve as the superintendent of schools, our 15 schools in the state of Indiana. Today, I'd really like to start by welcoming the team that's on the call with us. Dan Riley, our CFO, is here. Lynn Greggs, our controller. Laura Cope, who is the director of our special education, special needs programs. Ann Davis, senior director at Goodwill Education Initiatives. And then Corey Emery, who will be speaking next, is our regional director overseeing the Shelbyville School. We have illness, I think, due to COVID, and so therefore the leader that was going to be here today was not able to, but we are heavily involved in the school and able to speak to it. I'd also like to demonstrate gratitude for the support of our board. We have Gita Baker, who is one of our board members, our newest board member on the call. And then we also have our board chair, Jay Oliver, who is also joining us on the call. I'm cracking up because my daughter, who, like James's kids, is studying at home, just decided to make microwave popcorn. So I apologize to everyone. She was told that she was supposed to be quiet, and she decided to make microwave popcorn, and now she's laughing at me. No. So with that, I'm going to, I guess that's the great demonstration of the world we're existing in right now. So what I'd like to do is really take the board back to remembering when you approved this charter originally, and the huge support that the mayor in Shelbyville and the community had shown in wanting this school. They saw it as a solution for the industry, for their community. And I also want to express gratitude to this community and this mayor, because not only did they demonstrate that support in getting the school to come to Shelbyville, but they have consistently continued to demonstrate that support and that partnership throughout the years that we've been open down there. And so one of the best community partnerships that we have ever experienced in Shelbyville. So I really appreciated, James, your opening comments, because this is a community that is committed to us and our students and our graduates, and in turn, we are committed to this community. And with that, I think I'm going to go ahead and share, pass it over to Corey so he can share with you, how excited we are about what our students are being able to accomplish within the school, within their time with us, and then also what they're accomplishing beyond our walls as they graduate. So Corey, you want to go ahead and take over?
Absolutely. Thank you, Betsy, and thank you, board, for the chance to speak. Before I get into some of the work we've been able to do, I do want to recognize the school's leadership team, Kalila Palmer, the director of the school, our manager of office administration and English language learner coordinator, Hope Fenton, our college and career specialist, Susan Sheech, and our teacher of record, Maria Brown. Since we've been open in 2016, we have been an A. We've earned an A as a school grade every year we've been open. And we've been able to increase our enrollment numbers each year we've been open. And just to go a little bit deeper on what Betsy discussed, not only is the mayor of Shelbyville a strong supporter of us, he sits on our community advisory team and is regularly giving us that feedback about how we better can partner with the city and how the city can partner with us. We also have a major partner, no pun intended, with Major Health, the local hospital system that's in Shelbyville. And 2 or 3 times a year, they offer certified medical assistant certifications in our building with other community members, but also they're the ones teaching the course and then eventually placing the students at a high wage. We also have partnered with Discovery Preschool in town that serves ages 3 to 5 and enrolls students from the Excel Center's children. And when they turn 3, they can attend preschool before they go to kindergarten, which is a really big focus of ours in terms of making sure we're serving both generations of students. We have also, just in the last year, Hope Fenton has been a major player in this effort, but she has worked with the community to provide food support directly to our students through donations and other community supports. It has really grown over the last year and a half, really serving students directly. And I think lastly, but certainly not least, there's been a strong symbiotic relationship with our local high schools to make sure students who are not on track to graduate are working with us and eventually finishing with us as well. And so really strong, positive relationship with our local school superintendents and guidance offices. And really just to dive just a bit deeper in the school's performance, as I said, we've grown our graduates every year. When we opened in the first year, we graduated 15 students. This past year, we graduated 45. And we are on track to probably beat that number this year, as we already have 13 finished through the first 2 terms. Our accountability rate has been at or above 100% for the last 3 years in the way we are calculated. And our CCR rate, as James mentioned, has been very strong over the 4 years. And for a small town like Shelbyville to offer the breadth of certifications that they do in terms of ServSafe and CNA and certified nursing assistant, certified medical assistant, NCCER core curriculum for construction. Just the list goes on because of the partnerships they've built in town and with the larger network of schools across the state. And we continue to trend up in this school. This has been a great school the last 4 years. It was an experiment that's really gone well going into a small town like Shelbyville. I think that's all I've got. Betsy, did I miss anything?
No, I think that's great. I will just end with Kalila Palmer has her business degree. She's been part of our network from the very, very beginning when we first opened our doors and has continued to advance and then took over as director when we opened the school. So her balance of education and understanding of community in the business environment and how our graduates contribute to a community after they have been, educated rigorously, I guess is the best way I would say it, to that high degree of core 40 and certification and college credit. So really wanted to echo Corey's compliment of Kalila. And then with that, all of us are happy to take questions.
Thanks to you all. Board members, questions? Don't be shy.
I have a quick one.
Yep.
This is just, these meetings are always where I get educated about how things work. Would you remind me how the graduation rate is calculated for your type of school? Like when I see 99%, like for instance, of the current enrollment 163, would a 99% rate in the future on them being that 162 students graduated, or is it calculated a different way than that?
Yeah,
my guess is it is.
Yeah, you've got it right. I'm going to invite Corey and Ann to expand further, but described exactly it. We've actually gone beyond our graduation expectations.
Yeah, and with the accountability at its simplest form, the accountability model recognizes an A grade when we graduate 25% of our enrollment within a year, and that group has 80% or more of them earning a certification. And as you've seen over the last 4 years, it's regularly been above 90%.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, I would entertain a motion.
I move that we renew the Excel Center Shelbyville.
Do I have a second?
Second, Michelle, sorry.
Thanks, Michelle. All right. I'll call the roll. Dr. Calvin.
Yes. Am I on or not?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yep.
Yes.
Dylan.
Yes.
Goff. Kramer.
I'm recusing myself because of a conflict.
Okay. Ruger.
Yes.
Rommel.
Yes.
And Preston, yes. Motion passes. Congratulations, Excel Center Shelbyville.
Congrats, guys.
Thanks, everyone. We really appreciate the support of this board continually. Thank you so much.
Same rule applies to you. You're welcome to stay, but you don't have to. Okay, we are now going to move on to Hyatt. Now that we've clarified the whole "the" does not count. Once again, Hyatt is one of those schools like Ace Prep and like Steel City to follow that had some turmoil in its initial years. Hyatt actually came the closest to actually not opening. And it was solely because of a fundamental misunderstanding of the role of the founder of the school. I would say they had a corrective action plan in place prior to opening, and then another corrective action plan in place during their first year. And most of it was due to, again, I don't even know how to describe it, mismanagement. It was a bit of the founder thought that the founder was a sort of like the king, queen of the school, and that caused all sorts of problems. In addition, the founder also, and somebody please correct me if I'm wrong, entered into a lease that was not necessarily the best business deal without actually telling anyone, including the board. So again, you find yourself in a situation where a school, once the ship was righted, is forced to deal with situations that were not of their own making. We worked as hard as we could to fix the situation. It is I call it the nuclear option to actually remove board members because it's really not our place. But in this case, this is the one time where we actually told them that if they did not remove a board member, we would close the school because she was so toxic to the potential school's success. So with that background, the school has, again, like Ace Prep and like Steel City, has righted the ship. The first decision that they made, there was the excuse me, on that path was to enter into a relationship with Eve, Entrepreneurial Ventures in Education, which is the management company separate from the Phelan Leadership Academies. It's his management company arm that does mostly turnaround work. And they entered into it, the board decided to enter into a relationship with Eve. Eve, things were so bad when Eve showed up that Hyatt actually could not get a clean audit. And this is because there were so many missing receipts and unapproved expenses, and just it was chaos. And so Hyatt immediately, Eve immediately sat down with the board and sat down, with the leadership and began to put structures into place that have sort of led us to where we are today, which is where, while there is still a bit of a hole to climb out of, they are well on their way to climbing out of that hole. Everything about the school has improved, from school culture to school finances to I think their enrollment has maintained relative stability. They again had kind of a hole to get out of, but we have, with Eve's help, they have implemented specific strategies. First they did the analysis, a root cause analysis, and now they've begun to implement specific strategies in all of these areas, including budget management, hiring, firing, enrollment, et cetera, et cetera. As with everything else, enrollment is, key, right sizing your budget versus your enrollment. But with the significant experience that Eve provides, we are not concerned with Hyatt's financials in its current state. Their projections suggest that they'll operate on thin margins, but they'll hopefully be positive, and are well on their way to sort of getting themselves out of the hole that they were into. One thing that they could probably provide for us right now is an update on the lease situation, because that was, again, as I said, something that was entered into without anyone's knowledge, including our own. And generally speaking, we like to be involved in those discussions because one of the biggest mistakes a new school can make is overextending itself on lease payments, on a lease obligation or a mortgage obligation. So from a financial standpoint, again, a little bit like ACE Prep, started out in a hole, getting out of a hole, have the right team in place, taking the right steps, taking the right strategies. They're have had zero issues with their organizational compliance since Eve took over. Obviously, that was a bit of a disaster pre-Eve, but it's sort of turning into everything that we would expect from a school that has sort of adopted the PLA model. And with that, I will turn it over to the Hyatt representatives for their comments. Oh, and sorry, I guess our final recommendation is to again approve for a full renewal.
Good afternoon, and James, thank you so much for that trip down memory lane, and thank you for your support over the years, you and your entire staff. We actually are very grateful to be here today. As many of you heard, we were experiencing somewhat of a nightmare, but I received a call. Actually, it probably was an email from a Mr. Earl Martin Phelan back in December of 2017, and was so thrilled because of our instability that he was willing to work with us, because I'm sure everyone was aware. But I just want to say that with resilience, with perseverance, and our commitment to offering families in Maryville an alternative, we stayed the course, and we met with Mr. Phelan, and we were able to, in the next year, receive what we needed to move forward. We thought that there was, as James said, an understanding about the responsibility of the board and the functionality of the board when we discovered that there was not. It was a rocky road, and we listened every time we met with James. And with me having more of a background and an understanding of the role, and having been a board member myself, I was able to graciously step in and try to acquire what we needed to have the confidence of ICSB to move forward and to not let down the families. Because many families, as someone said earlier, at the time when we were about to close was in January, right before the second semester was going to begin. So there would have been a lot of families who were facing difficult choices about enrollment. So thank you, James. Thank you, board. Thank you, staff. Bridget, we've been through the trenches together and we survived. So we are so grateful and excited to be here. And I would like to welcome all of the PLA staff, Mr. Earl Phelan, the CEO. We're so grateful to you. Andrea Robinson, the Chief Academic Officer, is on. Eva Spilker, who I work very closely with, is the CFO. Mrs. Jillian Kemp is our principal. Sharita Combs is on. She is the instructional specialist. Dr. Athena Lockhart is the instructional specialist as well. And Courtney Lumbley, who I enjoy a really strong relationship with, is the regional director. So what we didn't have was all of these layers of support. And we thought that we could independently manage the school. And we found out that we had a great concept and a wonderful idea, even reflecting that we wanted technology in our schools all along. So when the pandemic hit, all of our scholars were very accustomed to working with tablets and on laptops. And so the transition was smooth, but we're just grateful that you believed in us long enough to overcome the challenges that we face. And I was just grateful for the opportunity to work with PLA. Their support has been phenomenal. Our opportunity to have an audit that we passed to us was remarkable and very satisfying. As we saw things change, we knew that we made the right decision to work with PLA. Now, I'll just quickly mention, and Eva can speak to this, we know that we are in a lease that every time we acquired a new scholar, our lease amount increased. That's how egregious this lease was. So we are so excited after this phone call today or after this meeting to be able to await the official documentation so that we can renegotiate a good lease. And we believe that we're in a good position because our support, we're a part of a church. And with the archdiocese, we took over the school building that had been empty for years. But we support them in such a great way that I have confidence that they will not want us to leave. So I just think it will be done right. I'm grateful to get past the 5 years, and this is a new beginning for us. We are getting stronger every day. We have great confidence in PLA. And right now, I am going to pass it on to our school leader, who's going to share just a little bit of the success that we've experienced, just even since she's taken over. So please welcome Mrs. Jillian Kemp.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Board President Johnson, for that exemplary way that you have just explained everything and brought me in. I feel like that I am going to have some hard shoes to fill, but I'm definitely going to try. Again, good afternoon, Board. Yes, my name is Jillian Kemp, and I am the school leader for Hyatt. And to speak to those hurdles coming in, we have gone above those hurdles and still have hurdles to strive to, but we've made so many strides. As far as I'm going to go back to the technology that Board President Johnson spoke to, our scholars are not just 1-to-1, we are 2-to-1. We have technology in the building as well as technology at home. And this would definitely cut down on our current pandemic situation. Our operations management team, along with PLA, has made sure that the structures put in place for safety have been there so that we have not had any COVID cases amongst our scholars since when we went hybrid. We are now virtual due to our county's numbers going up, but as a school community, we took the necessary precautions and our scholars have been safe since the beginning. Our kindergartners never went virtual, and they have been safe and COVID-free since then. I want to speak to closing the gap, academic gap, which is huge in any school organization. We have so many layers that are put into place, as was introduced. Our academic chief officer and our instructional specialists have together partnered with our instructional leaders in the building, as well as myself, to make sure that we are implementing structures put around curriculum and assessment to make sure that our scholars get what they need academically. We are implementing MTSS, small groups, and really just horning in on that data. For NWA, I'm excited to say that we were able to bring the majority of our scholars in school to test. So we were able to control the testing environment so that the authenticity of our scores were better than our most schools that had to test exclusively virtual. So now that we have that data, we have been able to implement the small groups necessary to horn in on those gaps that our scholars had coming from being at home from March up until really the beginning of school year and then having to go back out. Additionally to that, we have also adopted Summer Advantage, which during those summer months, our scholars were still able to get the necessary academic needs that they needed while they were in the summertime. So there was never a moment where the summer loss was great because they were still able to get in front of qualified teachers and get lessons and get authentic work that was being introduced to them. So our summer loss was not as great as it should have been under the circumstances that they had to go home in March. So that was huge for our population of scholars. Right now, we are in virtual learning. We have adopted Blackboard as our learning profile, our learning platform, rather, excuse me. And it is amazing how resilient scholars are in learning new technology. It really helps them with engagement. And we all know sitting in front of a computer for hours on end is so difficult. But with Blackboard, the scholars are able to almost mimic the classroom for brick and mortar with the raising of their hand abilities, the different functions, the different interactive abilities that they're able to do with Blackboard, writing, on the actual Blackboard. It has really shifted virtual learning for us as far as giving the scholars more of a in-class feel, but on the computer. Retention of our teachers is also very important to us. And with partnering with PLA, we have an extensive hiring procedure where they have to go through several layers before they are offered a position. And this is how we are maintaining our qualified teacher status, which currently all of our teachers have certification as of today. So we make sure, and PLA has helped us with that, to make sure that we're putting qualified teachers in front of our scholars every day. Along with their retention, we offer an immense amount of professional development, again, partnering with our PLA training team to make sure that our teachers not only come in qualified, but continue to stay qualified in the most updated best practices, technology, engagement, culture and climate, SEL, all those important elements that really helps our scholars to grow, not just as numbers and data, but the whole child. And that has been our model, that we educate the entire child, which speaks to why our culture has improved substantially. We also implement PBIS and Kickboard, which has been a driving force for our campus to really give those scholars that positivity that they need, that they may not be getting at home at the current moment. It keeps them motivated and want them to keep coming back, which brings me to enrollment. Our enrollment has seen a little bit of a decrease, but instead of us making excuses, we make solutions here at Hyatt. So our solutions, again, with PLA has implemented where we have an enrollment coordinator and enrollment team that is, we're in the processing of planning for getting scholars to come in spite of COVID. We have partnership with all of our surrounding daycares to really get in those kindergartners who, for lack of a better word, really don't have other options. We are the other option in Maryville, because a lot of times in the community, sometimes they feel like they can only go to their schools, when we have given them an opportunity to give those scholars a chance to have a different education. Retaining our families is utmost important as well. We make sure that we not only communicate with our scholars and foster relationships with our scholars, but we also foster relationships with our parents. We openly communicate with our parents through s'mores and robocalls and surveys. We make sure that their opinions are heard. And I think a lot of times, just speaking as a parent myself, that a lot of times in school communities, you're more invested when you feel like you have a voice. And that is important to us at Hyatt. We make sure that our parents and our families are valued and heard. The model for both PLA and Hyatt is that we value and we love our families. And we make sure that even in this pandemic, they are taken care of, which is why we also have a food program where they come and get lunch and breakfast for their scholars weekly, a full week of breakfast and a full week of lunch, and not just cold boxes, but they get hot meals that they can take home for their scholars. So we are approaching the entire child. And I have no doubt in my mind that our enrollment will go back up, even in spite of this pandemic, because we have made a lot of plans in order to get in our children, but not just bring in new children, but maintain and keep the scholars that we have currently. So that's just a little bit of a lot about Hyatt. And I do appreciate all of the help and the assistance that I have received from PLA coming in as a new principal. I am honored that I was given this opportunity, and just to work with so many different layers and have so many good structures, that I believe that in the next 5 years, we can go from good to great. And I appreciate the board for hearing us. At this time, I can turn it over to, I'm not sure if Eva wants to talk about finances or Ms. Combs want to talk about academics. It's kind of whoever wants to jump in.
We should probably wrap up, Jillian. So great presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Paley. I think
we're ready for questions.
Yes.
Great. Questions from the board?
I have a question about just from the financial standpoint, what are you all doing marketing wise to rewrite the history of Hyatt within the community, like outside of the population that you currently serve?
Well, I know that, sorry, there's an echo. We are the alternative, and people are very aware and very connected. We have a robust Facebook following. We have our website, and we are also involved in the community. The families are involved, and I think the best marketing is word of mouth. And before the pandemic, our numbers were very high because families were sharing about the success that their scholars were having, that our grade had improved. And even though people were aware of some of the tumultuous history, they saw the turnaround and are very aware of the success that we're now having. So we're very still committed to sharing with the community. I believe when the pandemic ends, those same families will probably come back, because word of mouth has just shared that PLA has allowed our scholars to not only be involved in academics, but we have karate, we have a vigorous arts program, we have so many other facets that actually fulfill what our mission was, to combine arts and technology with academics. And the word is out in Maryville and throughout Northwest Indiana.
I appreciate it, Ms. Johnson. Thank you.
I have a question more about academic performance. And, I was looking at the nearest Maryville school and really just kind of comparing. And so it looks like, is it Henry P. Feeler Elementary?
It's Filer Elementary.
Filer?
Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am.
So look, just comparing the two, I'm really having a hard time figuring out the performance is so much better at that school. It's not great, but it's so much better. And so I'm wondering why someone would choose to send their student to a school that is performing so much worse. And I guess I want to know, I know, the EVE model, and I'm wondering how fast can that really turn this around in terms of academic performance? Yes, there's an A letter grade, but that's a hold harmless letter grade. And so when I'm looking really at, the student achievement levels, it's so concerning to me. And I'm just really wondering how you're turning this around. What specifically are you doing to address this?
Ms. Rummel, I can start off too. And I think it's important, as you mentioned, we are an A school. We went from a D to an E, and that is held harmless score. There's a lot of growth that went into that score. So coming in and putting some of those instructional best practices in place, supporting our teachers, providing that support for effective instructional strategies is really moving the needle. So while it doesn't happen overnight, but in not only improving climate culture, supporting those scholars, we put those practices and that framework in place to be able to get that achievement up where we want it. I think it's also important to mention that while we have a neighboring school that has the high academic achievement, we also attract scholars from outside of Maryville. So we are the only option in Maryville for the type of home culture climate that some of those families are looking for and not finding in those neighborhood schools, but also we're attracting scholars from other areas outside of Maryville that feed into our building. So just a little bit about that instructional piece, yeah.
And do those students get there, do their parents drive them, or do they utilize public transportation, or how do they get there?
I could speak to that. Yes, we do have a bus company that does our transportation. It's completely free to scholars. When we first enroll, we get all their address, and then we create the routes that can pick up those scholars. We do have 2 buses currently, and we are able, the majority of our population are on public transportation. They come in on the bus, and then we have a couple of car rides. And then we also have the surrounding daycares that also bus their children to us as well.
And another additional piece that we're able to provide that some of those schools perhaps are not is just that small group instruction. We have small class sizes, but our staffing structure is also set up to be able to beat the scholars where they are academically, to close that gap, to really target specific skill deficits. So there's the other piece that we have to offer at Hyatt that may not be available at some of those other surrounding schools as well.
I'd like to just say that many parents who had an experience in Maryville where they felt their students' needs weren't actually being fully met took a chance on Hyatt because of the smaller classroom size and because of the changing demographics. They knew that there would be some culture and climate celebrations that might not exist in some other settings.
This is James. If I can actually weigh in on this, because I remember the Hyatt public hearing, which was one of the more contentious public hearings we've ever had. And the one takeaway that I want to give you about that meeting was that there were, I don't know how many people there, 60, 70, Nikki might know. Every single person that spoke out against the school were Maryville employees, Maryville School District employees and union members. And every single person that spoke out in favor of the school was a parent who felt as if their child was not getting either culturally or academically or just not being treated the same in the school district, and felt that it wasn't serving their needs. And I found that to be quite striking. It wasn't so much the comments that were being made, because the expectation is that most school districts will oppose a charter school coming in. It was the fact that the breakdown between who was opposed and who was supported was so stark. It was all parents that were supportive, and they were all saying that they weren't getting what they needed from the school district. And I know that that's a very complicated subject, and there are a lot of things that go into that that may be beyond academics, but it was very clear to me from participating in that public hearing that there were a lot of dissatisfied parents in Maryville who felt as if their child needed another option. And I bring that up just because it was so glaring at that public hearing, and I've never really seen anything else like it anywhere else. So with that, I'll be quiet.
Thanks for that background information. Helpful.
I have one question. I didn't go back and look at your full enrollment trends, but I'm just curious. I can make the assumption that most of your new enrollment each year comes in at kindergarten, and they matriculate through the system. But are you still attracting students to the other grades?
Yes, we are. Currently, we are open to all grades at the moment. So yes, we do get upper grades, and we do find that most of our upper grade scholars do come from the Maryville community schools. So whereas the kindergarten and the primary students come from the surrounding daycares, the upper grades, I would say about 3rd to 8th graders primarily come from either the Maryville School Corporation or the Gary School Corporation.
And just as a follow-up, when they arrive, and I don't know if you can ascribe this broadly to the group, but when they arrive, how are those students performing? Are they behind when they arrive? And do we assume that's part of the reason their parents are seeking another option? Or, is there any sort of general statement you could make about that?
So it varies. We do have scholars that are performing lower, that parents felt that their scholars were not getting that one-on-one for that scholar that they needed in order for them to grow academically. We have scholars who come in with IEPs that they felt that the services they were getting from the bigger districts was not following their IEP closely enough for that scholar to be successful. And then we've also had scholars that come in that are performing very high, and they felt that the rigor that the surrounding school was not providing them with enough to not just keep their scholar where they are academically, but also push that scholar and challenge them. We actually had a recent mother, first grader, and her scholar tested in the third and fourth grade for reading and ELA, and he tested in our building. So we know that it was authentic. And mom's biggest concern was the surrounding school was not horning in on his abilities, and he was becoming a behavior problem. And I remember her because I met her as she was one of my parents that I met when I became the principal for a meet and greet. And when I saw her appear in our enrollment, I was excited. And she said, yes, your conversation made me so comfortable in bringing my son. And right now she is one of our best parents. Her son not only gets the qualified teacher that he's in front of, but then he gets a enrichment type of small group that helps to not just keep him where he is, but continue to push him to those heights that mom felt he was not getting someplace else.
Great, thank you. Other questions?
I've got one or two. Actually, the comment about the public hearing and public input made me ask this one now. And again, this one goes to kind of all the schools, but maybe this one I noticed the most. I'm noting that hardly anyone attended the public hearings for this round of applications, and they were all online, which would make them incredibly easy to go to. At Hyatt, I'm seeing that there were two people who attended the meeting electronically, and they were both teachers at the school and were definitely in support. But no one else, it appears. My question is this is a broad question for the board staff, and then it's also a specific question for Hyatt. How were the public hearings publicized this year?
Okay, I can speak to that. So our parents, no problem. Our parents have several notices in different platforms of social media. So we advertise it on Facebook. We also advertise it on our own website, Hyatt website. We also advertise it through our SMORE newsletter that I send out weekly and bi-weekly to inform parents. We also have our own Hyatt email that we also send out to parents as well, reminding them. And lastly, but not least, we have our robocalls that sends a voicemail, text message, and email with information that we have. So we definitely flood our parents with an abundance of information and reminders to let them know that we encourage them to come to things. And then we also will make personal phone calls, but at this point it starts to look like harassment. So we try not to do as much to continue to push that envelope, but we make sure that our parents know what is going on in the building and let them know how important their presence and voice is.
Good. So the parents were very well informed of the public hearing then, definitely. What about the public?
So with the same, as far as the public goes, our public website, as I stated, Facebook, who does not follow Facebook nowadays? We also have Instagram. I did forget to mention them for public announcements as well.
Right. And the newspapers, radio. I mean, how would the public who's not part of your school community know about the public hearing?
Right. Understood. I don't know if somebody else can help chime in with that as far as the newspaper and the radio.
Or ICSB board, how did we publicize the public hearings? I know I live close to ACE Prep, which was the only local one, and I definitely didn't hear or see anything about the public hearings.
So we did have them posted on our website as well as on the physical location at our office. So
and
that's how we.
Offices, yeah, nobody would see that though. I mean that you definitely did notice. You definitely complied with notice requirements. That's good. But I'm seeing the ICSB Facebook and Twitter accounts are inactive. And which I understand because you're buried with things. Staff doesn't have time for that. But as I'm hearing about a public hearing 5 years ago in Maryville that apparently was very well attended, and now I'm hearing about one that was basically not attended at all. I'm a little worried that our public doesn't even know this has happened.
Mary Ann, let me address that.
Thanks,
Okay,
James.
so historically, almost nobody comes to renewal hearings.
Right.
I don't know why that is. It may be because people don't really understand the process and understand what it means.
Probably is.
And, we follow the open door law requirements with regards to public notice. And I'm not sure, I don't know how many followers our social media has, maybe 4. So I'm not sure that's going to help. I mean, Nikki could probably tell you exactly how many we have. I'm not sure how it would help, but I'm not against posting on our Facebook and Twitter pages. It's the conundrum that the only people, I mean, we send notice to everyone who requests it per
Right.
open door rules and to superintendents. It's just that no one generally comes to renewal hearings, and that has been true for almost every renewal hearing we've ever had, unless the school brings folks specifically to the renewal hearing. And I'm not quite sure what the answer is. I don't know what else, the open door law requires what it requires. And that's true for all meetings, not just public hearings.
Right.
So if you have a bet, I mean, if you have, I'm not sure what else we would do.
Right. I think, this is for a different meeting and a different conversation. But I think that whenever the charter school law was created and the whole process was created, it was created with the idea that the public would have input. And your staff is great, and you guys are doing good work, and I don't have a problem at all with the work that you're doing. I'm very impressed with the staff always. But I think that there is another part that we need, because these are by law public schools. But when the public for a charter school becomes only the families of that school, then we lose some of the credibility of that. And so we need to work on that. And that's probably something more with the media that needs to be worked on for the future. And I mainly bring it up here because I think before we get into the spring round of applications, that's something I would really like to see a lot of work on. And I think it also helps when the public knows it's happened, then they're just going to have a lot more buy-in and support of the schools as well. Thanks.
I definitely think that's something worth discussing at a future meeting.
Right.
I'd offer there's one other difference here as well, and then we can move on. But the population of our charters is much smaller than the public school district. So when for instance, Mary Ann, when IPS holds a public meeting of some sort, it impacts a lot of families in our city. And so it's of more interest to the news media to share that information. And for some of our smaller schools, honestly, there's not the same amount of attention paid. So, but maybe there are ways that we could help remedy that.
Yeah, we can chat offline. Thanks.
Any other questions for the Hyatt team? Okay.
For Preston?
Yeah.
This is Bridget.
Yeah.
Hi. I just wanted to make notation earlier when it was discussed about the iLearn data for Hyatt versus the closest elementary. I did want to make notation just for all the board members that that particular elementary is a pre-K through 4th grade. So their results are not comparable entirely to Hyatt because they are a K through 8. So the overall analysis would not be an apples to apples comparison. So I just want to make that noted in terms of percent proficiency would not be the same grade levels, which we've now addressed in our accountability framework moving forward, because we do actually look at the grade spans within the comparable schools.
Yep, I
But I
recall.
want to make notation of that.
I think that would be super helpful. I looked at the other school too and the other grades as well. So, but thanks for that clarification. I think that grade level achievement will be important to report out on since, DOE doesn't really present that information anymore. I think that'll be really important moving forward.
I agree, Janet. So thank you for that.
Yep.
Thanks, Bridget. Any other board questions? Okay, seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the staff's recommendation for full renewal.
This is Michelle. I move that we provide full renewal to Hyatt. And I want to note that back when Hyatt was initially approved, I was on ICSB staff and I was at the public hearing that James described earlier, and I noticed the marked difference. I think I actually helped draft some of our analysis in which we highlighted the composition of those making the comments at the hearing.
Thanks, Michelle. Do I have a second for that motion?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you. All right, Dr. Calvin.
Yes, support.
Dylan.
No.
Goff.
Yes.
Kramer.
Yes.
Ruger.
No.
Rummel.
Yes.
Preston, yes. Motion passes 5-2. Congratulations, Hyatt team.
Congratulations, Hyatt.
Thank you so much.
Okay, let's just get through this last one. I didn't mean it to sound that way. I mean, I don't think we need to take a break or anything, because I don't know how you do that on a virtual platform. But anyway, so the last but not least is Steel City. Steel City is, again, we are recommending an approval for full renewal. It is the same issue with the academic analysis. They actually received a C in their first year of operation, and then an A in 17-18, and then of course an A in the subsequent 2 years as a result of hold harmless. They are meeting, let's just say they've improved on our accountability system for our accountability metrics, our academic metrics, but their enrollment plan was so bizarre from the beginning. And again, this is a different founding team founded the school and then left, I think, after year one. So the data that we have for them is a bit all over the place, and you can see there they opened up. They initially, I think, were approved for a 4.8, and then it changed to a 7.9, and then finally we get into sort of a 7, 8, 9, 10, and a more normal grade span. I have no idea what effect that had on their enrollment or anything like that, but I'm still a little baffled as to why they were approved to open as a 4.8, because that seems quite strange to me. But at any rate, the primary changes with, or the primary issues with Steel City is similar. The two founders of the school made a lot of decisions and then left. So you have a school leader who came in, and a board who had to then quickly adjust. And there was a bit of a rough patch in the transition. I won't say that the transition went particularly smoothly in terms of your normal handoff as to, like, here are the responsibilities, this is what you're responsible for, not responsible, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the new school leader, or the school leader who took over, Katie Curley, is an extremely hardworking, dynamic school leader. As a result, their enrollment sort of went crazy. They are one of the few schools that has not had enrollment issues. They went from 146 to 293 to 427 to 450. And then, of course, the pandemic hit, and they're down to somewhere in the, and they can probably tell you what their real time is, but somewhere down in the 412, 415 range. I think the primary issue with Steel City was that they grew probably faster than they expected. And this is very common in new schools, you have a school leader who ends up wearing far too many hats too soon. And so things sort of get lost in the shuffle as that school leader tries to do everything. So one of the most important things that has happened to Steel City in the last year or so is that the board and the school leader has become more intentional about the fact that changes needed to be made. Like, you can't keep going on like this as your school continues to grow, particularly if you're going to grow, from a 7-8 to a K-12, and that organizational structure, a change in organizational structure is critical. So Katie has officially moved. She was the previous sort of wearer of all hats. She has moved now into an executive director role, which focuses more on big picture, including finance and enrollment. And she is, quite a dynamic leader. I know I've said that twice now, but I guess you just have to talk to her to understand. And has now hired principals to manage the day-to-day academic spread of the grades. So, you have a younger, I think they're a K, there's a principal for high school, and then there's a principal for the younger kids. And during the staff interview, we asked them how that went, because obviously that's sort of a substantive change. And they were all, both the admin and the teachers that we spoke to separately, all said that it's been nothing but a positive change. Now you have groups that can focus on academics. We're not missing reports, which was an issue with Steel City for a little while. Again, similar to ACE Prep, because of the wearing of too many hats. They've the other aspect of that is that they took a long, hard look at their budget and considerably right-sized the budget based on students. They had a very low student-to-teacher ratio, which, it's possible to have too few students from a budgeting or too few students per teacher from a budgeting perspective. So they right-sized their budget. The governing board created a financial working group that the budget had significant budget cuts to account for funding reductions, and to look forward-looking to improve their financial viability. They also, which I thought was great, created their own internal dashboards based on our metrics, so that they could monitor the school's situation in real time. Eventually, I would hope that we could do that for them. Bridget and I have been working on that for years to try to figure out a way to get sort of a real-time dashboard where schools can simply look at it and know how they're doing in real time. Haven't quite gotten there yet, but we work for the state, so you know how that goes. Their budget was very transparent and very well thought out, given the state of funding these days. And then when it became clear that they wouldn't hit enrollment targets, they came together and revised the budget, which included another round of expenditure cuts. They're still in a position, I believe, at a 13-to-1 student ratio, there's certainly room to reduce expenses should it be necessary. Their most recently submitted financial workbook, which was due November 30th, so it's very recent, indicated a positive change of net assets and a revised budget that projects a surplus for the next year. They, unfortunately, like the other two schools, are somewhat dealing with some debt that had basically related to the facility that had been incurred by their predecessors. They have managed to work out deals to renegotiate the debt by extending terms of current loans and pushing back a balloon payment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So for Steel City, like with ACE Prep, enrollment is the primary factor. They, as you historically, have been growing at a very fast rate, and maybe not necessarily making adjustments that they needed to make as a result of that. They are no longer, they are far more thoughtful now. Their organizational structure is right-sized. They have reevaluated their budgeting process and their budget. And this is another case where they're fine right now. They need to really work on increasing enrollment and then continue to tweak their budget to make sure that not only that expenditures match revenues, but also that they are in a position where they can, continue to chip away at debt. And we believe that they can do that now that Katie, the school leader / executive director, now is in that role where she can really focus on enrollment. And one of the striking things that came out of our conversation with them during our interview with the administrative team is that the admission that they really hadn't been intentional about enrollment at all. They just sort of opened and people just sort of showed up. And that's incredibly lucky. And there are many, many schools out there that would love to have that sort of result. But now they are intentional about seeking out enrollment opportunities, and in particular in the younger grades, because of their current spread, they're not a full K-12 yet. Where they're going to get their sustained growth is in kindergarten. And so one of the things Katie mentioned specifically is that, there are 30, and she can be more, provide more detail, 30 daycares or pre-Ks in the area that they've never tapped as a resource. And it's because they haven't had to. And now, more intentionally, they're going to start to try to build these partnerships and build feeders and actually leverage the Steel City name and its reputation to rectify these situations. So we're recommending a 5-year renewal with the same caveat that we gave for ACE Prep, which is that we will work closely with Katie and her board, who is very engaged, and to monitor enrollment, to monitor finances, to monitor all of those things that are indicators that of financial viability, to make sure that we don't get caught off guard if something goes south. So with that, I will turn it over to Katie and her team to make their presentation.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Katie Curley. I feel like James set me up for a lot of pressure now to be this dynamic leader that you mentioned. So I will rise to the challenge. It is an honor and a privilege to be in front of you today. I want to start with just so much gratitude to the ICSB staff. I feel like since COVID and through this process, I'm just so grateful for your support. And throughout this entire renewal, the diligence and the intentionality and even the humanity that you have brought to this process has been so appreciated and grateful. And to the ICSB board, thank you for all that you do for students and families and the hard work that you put in to go above and beyond for our kids across the state of Indiana. So I am also joined here today with Dr. Catherine Burns, our board chair, who is excited to field and answer questions as well. But 5 years ago, at that time, it was Global Leadership Academy that stood before this board with a vision and an idea. And it was a group of 4 people, myself included, that were aligned and deeply passionate about the community of Gary. See, I came to Gary in 2007, but by what I say is the best beautiful accident that has ever happened in my life, both personally and professionally. And we were a team of 4 people that were connected in this belief that there's oftentimes a single story that's told about our kids in Gary and what is possible for them and what a school looks like in Gary. And we were a committed, passionate group ready to really deconstruct that single story and redefine what it looks like for our kids and for our families. So after we were approved by the Indiana Charter School Board in May of 2015, that's when the real work started. And if we wanted to be a school that redefined what the expectations and the model and the results looked like in Gary, we wanted to make sure that Gary was a part of the conversation and that they were a part of the process. And so we hit the pavement and we met with over 1,800 people in a listening tour at the Boys and Girls Club and at the Y and the McDonald's right down the street here on 35th and Grant to really get the answers from students and parents, faith-based leaders, educators around what is the school model that is going to leverage the really unique assets and talent and people in this community while serving and addressing some of the unique challenges. And so we got to work. We talked to those people, and from that, we surfaced and elevated 5 organizational decisions that we made, some of which, like any decisions, we look back and was like, was that the right one? But some that we remain really, really committed in, and some strong decisions about what our educational model was. So one of the things that came out of that listening tour was a name change. And so we were a school that was uniquely here to serve and redefine a school in Gary. We wanted our name to reflect just the beauty and the rich, robust history of this community. So we changed our name to Steel City Academy. Gary is the Steel City, and designed a logo, actually one of my former students, that really reflected the strength and all of our 5 core values at Steel City of purpose, power, team, joy, and grit. We also listened to the community about our location. So one of the things we heard in our public hearing was that Gary is saturated with charter schools. And so we listened and responded to our community, and in conjunction with the closing of a large traditional district school, Lew Wallace, we knew that we needed to be in Glen Park because before we existed, there was not a middle school or a high school options for our kids and our family since Lew Wallace had closed. And so we found a nonprofit building here, and we got to work. Also to address James, the original application had 4th and 8th grade, and as we sat down with parents, they too were a little confused. And at that time, Gary school configurations were K through 6. Then there were junior high, 7, 8, and then high schools, 9, 12. So year 1, in a response to community voice, we shifted to start with 7th and 9th grade. A decision that in our first few years, as you can see by our enrollment numbers, paid huge dividends. People were coming and the demand was there. And so we know early on that was a great decision to respond to the community. But now as we think about our enrollment strategy, we've got to build it from the ground up. We also, coming out of that, there was a huge voice and understanding that there are incredibly talented people in the city of Gary, Indiana. And we needed to create really unique talent strategies to cultivate those people. And so we have a strong partnership with IUN and their UTEP program for teachers. We also built our own Steel City Legacy Educator Fellowship program. So our leadership team, we've been in the game for a while. And so we have 8 of our former students who are now our co-teachers and our lead teachers and have come back from college and university to come make a difference in the community. Something that will never be found on a framework, but indicative of the power and the community impact that Steel City Academy has had. In terms of our school model, again, listening to the 1,800 community members, we made a couple of important decisions. So one, we believe that schools are the anchor of communities. And so we created and aligned our school design and program to match needs. So how does that show up? So one, we have a food pantry in our building, which our students and families have access to 5 days a week. We have a clothing center with multiple sets of washers and dryers so that our families have access to that 5 days a week. We also have really strong social emotional learning programs. And with our partnership with opportunities for 100% of our students to have access to mental health services, which we think are critically important. In terms of our academic model, we recognize again the assets and also the unique challenges that many of our students are facing when they come to us, multiple grade levels behind. So our school schedule is a unique reflection of that. So our students are in grade level, really rigorous academic courses. And then we have what we call gear groups, again, using the gear in our logo, so that students every day are getting targeted, individualized instruction to fill those academic gaps. And when I talk about our academic successes, that educational model decision is a result of that. And then finally, we believe school, part of our role is to provide access to opportunity and experiences that our students might not have otherwise. And so I'm excited to share some of those at the end. So here we are 5 years later. And what I will say about this team, and I'm sure James and his team felt it, we are an honest, self-reflective, solutions-oriented bunch. And with a track record of when we put a plan in place, we execute it. So I know as a board, the thing that's top of mind for all of you about Steel City and what would be any hesitancy to a full approval is our financial health. And so we're going to start there. We're going to talk about it. And so, one thing that I want to note, and James mentioned this, is that, in the beginning of our second school year, our founding executive director and our director of operations resigned. And we did not course correct quickly enough. And instead, Band-Aid solutions in terms of our staffing model to get there. So I was operating as both the executive director and the principal. We were partnering with Lazarion to do some of our accounting work, and we didn't have enough bandwidth. We didn't have enough capacity or people. And obviously there were negative impacts. We didn't have the budgeting systems. There was a lack of monitoring and course correcting accordingly. But currently I can say to you very confidently that we now have the right focus, the right people, and the right systems in place to course correct. And we have data and evidence that we are on the right track. So for example, even the financial dashboard that you are looking at for our year-end FY20 numbers is drastically different. We've received a payroll protection program loan of $805,000, which significantly got us out of the hole. And so with those updated internal statements being at over 900,000 of a negative net asset position, we were at a negative 150, a significant drastic difference that moves the needle on our financial health and our financial position. We also have course corrected in terms of our staff model. So we have hired in June of 2018 our own internal director of finance. And like James mentioned, and as of July 1st, I transitioned into the full executive director role, so that in addition to the oversight of the academic success, my time is much more allocated to organizational compliance and our financial health. We also have the right focus with our board. We have put together a strong finance working group that meets monthly to analyze and assess our budget to actuals, allow me and ask strong questions to me about our monthly variance and ensure our fidelity to our budget. And then we have the right system. So as Jane mentioned, we have done multiple revisions of our FY21 budget to respond to all of the variables, COVID, enrollment, our learning plan. And we went to a very inflated percentage of personnel and have decreased that significantly. We also, when we look and analyze our end of Q1 financials, we are ahead of budget and with a positive net asset position. So those changes are working, and we know the changes have happened. We know what the root cause was, and they are moving in the right direction. Like we mentioned, ahead of budget and with a surplus. And so our Q1 financial workbook and our financial position is significantly different. So where do we need to go from here? Enrollment is our number one focus. What we thought was a blessing of the students just coming to us ended up being a curse. We did not need to have an intentional enrollment strategy. The apps were rolling in. And it is clear in the time of COVID, it shone a light on the fact that a strategy is necessary. Our strong partnerships and networks, we are very confident in leveraging those in order to create these feeder and partnership programs. There are over 43 pre-K and early childhood education centers in the city of Gary. We have prioritized this fall too that we have a large portion of our students that go to ELCA and the Little Dreamers to ensure that we are building those pathway programs I've already met with the principal of Aspire, a K-8 charter school here in Gary, and Justin Stokes over at Charter School of the Dunes, that are both K-8 schools, so that we can build these strong partnerships for students to transition from 8th grade into high school. One thing in our 5-year budget workbook that you will notice is we have course corrected and really right-size our staffing model to be more aligned to a benchmark industry standard of a 20-to-1 ratio, so that we are not replicating these mistakes that we've made in the past. And so we are confident, I'm excited to answer additional questions, but we are confident that Steel City will be financially sustainable and financially healthy this year and in the years to come. I want to touch a bit on our academic success. So one of the things that, brings families to Steel City is they are very invested and intrigued about attending an A letter graded school here in Gary. And despite that we have had, kind of apples and oranges and inconsistent Indiana academic assessments, that does not mean that we have not heavily monitored our students' academic growth and academic achievement. So a few examples. So when we think about the ISTEP and attempting to compare apples to apples, our founding 9th graders, when they took the ISTEP for the first time, had a 12% pass rate in math. After 3 years with us, we ended that they were at a 70% pass rate. So our students that are with us, we make the academic gains, and that shows up not just in growth, but in performance data. Our English data was even more significant. So our founding 9th graders, when they took ISTEP for the first time, were at a 22%. It was at a 90% pass rate. So with our high quality academic success and instruction and that growth, you'll see that show up in our A letter grade. Additionally, as it relates to nationally normed assessments, in our 2018-2019 school year, our students across our K-8 are growing 2.3 years in math, putting us in the 93rd percentile nationally and 2.5 years in ELA. So again, that educational model is yielding the results. Additionally, with COVID, our team was able to really quickly and intentionally pivot to a strong, robust, and unique learning plan that was really recognized on a national level by the Bellwether Education Partners about being one of the 12 schools across the nation with promising strategies of how we are continuing to provide a high quality instruction and all the essential resources to our students in the time of COVID. And so we are super excited about that. Right now, we are averaging 94.5% daily attendance as we are operating both a virtual model of school and in building success pods so that our students still and families still have access to all those essential resources that are really unique at Steel City. Additionally, we have a very strong social emotional learning program that leads to really high levels of student retention. So if you look at our dashboard, we are exceeding standard in our student re-enrollment rate from year to year. And we believe that is because both the core values that manifest when you walk through our hallways, as well as the really, really strong relationships. Steel City is a family school, and that shows up in the data. As it relates to our organizational compliance, we had some rocky steps those first few years. But if you look at our most recent data, we are green all the way down in meeting standards and organizational compliance, other than reporting requirements. So we have course corrected, we have put together a compliance tracker that I both share with Catherine in our ED and board chair meetings, and I meet with our compliance team on every other week. And we believe that organizational shift is really going to ensure and allow that we meet standard in the years to come. And like I mentioned, Steel City is so much more than the things that show up in a framework. And as you drive through the city of Gary, the impact of our school and our families and our kids, you will see to the eye. So you may drive by some of the abandoned buildings and see boarded up unique and original poems from our students as we founded the Gary Poetry Project with a local nonprofit. You will see paintings next to our Union Station where we partnered with the Decay Devils and where our students did a mural that said, "We are not here to be quiet, we are here to take over." You will see our partnership with Urban and Faith Farms and we have bees and chickens and hoop houses with urban farming. We partner with local art studios and do an annual program of cuts and coats so that students have the fresh cuts and brand new coats as they go into the holidays. We have partnered with the Gary Health Department and Merrim Health to be a COVID drive-through testing site every other Friday for our families, our students, and our staff so that they feel they can come to a place that they trust and feel loved so that we can all remain safe. Again, things that are indicative of the roots that Steel City has really built in this community, and that our students continue going back to what our original vision was, to get access to experiences that they may not have had in other places. So for example, we have a program called Gear and Flame Week, where we invite community partners in to lead courses that we hope ignite a passion or an interest that maybe our students didn't know about. So in year one, for example, we had somebody from NPR come and lead a podcast course. Our kids had never heard of podcasting. And now we are proud to say we have a New York Times student award-winning podcast. And it is about, again, school and Steel City being so much more than just academics, but the experiences that they have been afforded as a result of attending and being a part of the school. So I am excited to answer questions. I am grateful for your time, and I look forward to continuing to provide access to our students for an education and a model that redefines what is possible.
I understand now, James. You said dynamic. I get it. Thank you, Katie. I guess now would be a great time for board questions.
I have some questions and a comment as well, you all. I don't know, Ms. Curley, if you can answer this or not, but with the structural changes, I heard a lot of administration being added to your group. And so typically with the addition of those positions, typically it could directly affect the classroom to pull funding from that. And so since the application process is more so geared around the financial piece versus the academic components, with those changes, did it affect the classroom?
Great question. So prior to the transition from me, from executive director and principal, we had already had an elementary principal in place. So when elementary opened, I wanted to ensure that we had somebody with a really strong elementary instructional vision and model. So the elementary principal had already been in place for 2 years, so there was no impact across the elementary school. In the middle school and high school, we took what was our director of instruction, who's born and raised in Gary and been working in Gary for 18 plus. He promoted for staff morale. She had gotten the track record. What we did is we actually restructured what had been the middle school and high school leadership team. So with this transition, we actually cut administrative positions. We got rid of the director of instructions roles and instead elevated teacher leader fellows. So we have some incredible teachers. We knew that our focus needed to be on our math results. So we took 2 of our highest performing math teachers and made them math and STEM teacher leader fellows, so that they are creating and have sort of a model classroom, and that they are providing additional coaching and support for our math teachers across 7-12. So with this pivot, we actually decreased administrative positions and elevated more teacher leaders so that there was not a negative, and we're actually seeing a positive impact on academic results.
Okay. And then also, I'm from Gary, so the enrollment directly impacts us, like in you all's application. It impacts finances. We wish that education wasn't so tied to the financial piece. So one thing that I appreciated with ACE was the partnership that they already have with that pre-K program that will help their survival rate. But with Gary, what I see some of your plans and the partnerships that you're developing with trying to get that started. What's your understanding about the competition that you have in the area?
Great question. So, in terms of Gary Community Schools, they are obviously in terms of serve largest amount of students in the city of Gary. Prior to the most recent emergency project manager with Dr. McNulty, Dr. Marikas and I had a really strong relationship. So we actually, some of our students attend the Gary Career Center, and we are trying to view ourselves, while understanding the competition and that it certainly, exists, recognizing how we can leverage some of the unique partnerships there as well. I've been enrolled in an enrollment academy with Nick Leroy, and one of the things that he says is you have to recognize where you are unique and where you are better, right? And so we recognize we are not going to have the large sports teams. We are not, that's not who we are. That's not our identity, but we recognize who we are, and we have really strong identity, and our marketing and our messages and our really intimate conversations with families and community partner speak to that, that this is a strong family field school with a teacher where your child will be known, they will be safe, they will feel loved, they will have access to all of these resources and a high quality education. And so I think, in terms of understanding the competition, it's recognizing what they have to offer, what are they unique and better at, and who are we, and how do we ensure in all of our marketing and our communications and in our enrollment strategy, we tell our story really effectively so that families know who we are.
And so this is my comment to you, Ms. Curley. So regardless of how I vote, and James was saying, that you didn't have a strategy when you came to Gary's for enrollment, but your greatest asset is that you're visible. And out of any other charter school in my city, I've always seen you in the community. So I commend you for that. Like you've changed, helped to change my thought process because my background as a teacher and a union member. And you have some solid teachers. I've had some of your students, and you actually have some of the ones that I've taught from Williams, and they were excited to go into your school. So to see their light still shine as they had, going into your school, I just commend you for that. So, my focus right now is just more like the financial pieces to things, but I do commend you for you being invested in my community and actually in my community as opposed to a lot of people. So I just want you to be left with that, Ms. Curley.
Yes, I appreciate and I receive all of that. So thank you so much for those genuine words. I really appreciate it.
Other questions?
I've got one question, and it's I'm asking it here because your finances are a bigger piece of the question. You mentioned the $805,000 payroll protection program loan, which you said has been a big factor in your success this year financially. Can you, and maybe James wants to jump into if that's helpful, can you help me to understand? I understand that gave you almost immediate cash, which would be so helpful. It also puts a liability on your books, which affects your ratios and a lot of other things. Can you tell me, and maybe James can help too, how that loan is accounted for? I'm assuming the state's hopefully giving some direction by now on how it should be recorded and accounted for. Does it cause some other problems is part of my question.
So I'll start with that. So we're actually, kind of working arm in arm with our auditors right now to answer a lot of those questions. And so we've been really grateful, Evan, and their guidance. And everybody's, I think, honestly trying to figure it out because it's, it's for the first time. So we're going through right now the forgiveness process. So we've submitted all of our documentations to Fifth Third Bank and in order to get entire forgiveness of that loan so that it would be removed as a liability. And because we did that, 100% of those funds were used for payroll within that 24-week window. If we have solid documentation, which we do, then all of our contacts, including our auditors, have high levels of confidence that will be forgiven and removed as a liability. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Unmuted now. Does it sound okay?
Yep, you're good.
Thank you. Is there any issue with, I'm assuming you got the funds before June 30th, but forgiveness will be after June 30th. Is that an issue at all or not?
Not to our understanding, no.
Okay. James, did universal issue going on?
How Katie just described it is how I understand it to work. The one question I don't know, because I'm not an accountant by trade, is how auditors will reflect the transaction, right? Like you're right, it's a liability in one fiscal year and then not in another fiscal year. And I think I'm just going to have to, as schools go through this and as these loans get forgiven, we're going to have to sit down with our maybe some of the auditors and or Brian Anderson, who was on earlier, and say, okay, how do we factor this into our accountability system, right? Because if it's no longer a liability, we don't want it to reflect badly on a school's ratio or something for something that was ultimately forgiven. But by the same token, we also want to make sure that everyone who got it actually gets it forgiven, because if some or all of it isn't forgiven, then it does remain a liability. So we're, like Katie said, a lot of schools are in the process of figuring this out right now. And we're keeping an eye on it. And, once things sort of settle down and they start getting forgiven or not forgiven, we'll take whatever steps we need to take to make sure that we track it properly.
Thanks.
Good question. Any others?
I had to take a quick call while Katie was giving a little bit of the presentation. And so I apologize, Katie, if you already addressed this. I was curious, I can't seem to find your graduation rate. It looks like, and I'm a little bit confused. Was your first graduation cohort, I know you have seniors now, I guess is what I'm saying. Did you have seniors last year? Did you have any graduates? And then sort of like, what is your pipeline now? Do you feel like most of them are on track, or, how are you handling, maybe some of the new pathways for students to graduate?
Great question. So we did have our first graduating class last year. So our class of 2020 was our group that started with us as freshmen. So those were our and so we're actually in the audit, in the graduation right now to work to get some of those off our record who transferred out of state. Pre-audit, we were at 80% of that for the four-year cohort status. But we're confident if, with the proper documentation and the final determination that we'll be able to move those off of that. And, that was obviously without the unique pathway opportunities that we can now offer students. And so we have implemented 3 different unique pathways. And so one is continuing with the Core 40. Like I mentioned, we have a strong partnership with the Gary Career Center, as well as all the other local trades and organizations within the city of Gary, as well as some additional community service and leveraging some of the things we're already doing in the community for some local Gary pathways around community level impacts.
Nice. Okay, thank you.
Other questions from board members? Okay, seeing none, I would entertain a motion to move forward with the staff recommendation to approve a full renewal for Steel City.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All right, Dr. Calvin.
Yes.
Dillon.
No.
Goff.
Yes.
Kramer.
Yes.
Ruger.
No.
Rummel.
Yes.
And Preston, yes. Motion passes 5-2. Congratulations, Steel City.
Congratulations, everyone.
Congratulations.
Thank you all so much for your time.
Okay, guys, let's quickly move to the last two items on our agenda, which hopefully won't take very long. These are, one is something that we've brought up before, but was never really fully discussed. The other is something that has come up very recently, and that is the flexibility for certain charter requests. Now, this is not something that had ever occurred to me before, but apparently I've now received, we had the Phelan request to split its middle school and high school into two separate charters. And I have now heard from two other schools that wish to do the same thing. So let me talk a little bit about what exactly they're requesting. Both of these requests, they're a little bit different in that one of the requests is from a school that already has and has been serving the grades at issue. In other words, if they're a K-8, they've been serving K-8. The other is been approved for a grade span and is asking to split charters prior to serving the split grade span, if that makes sense. So you've been approved for K-8 already in your initial charter application. They want to split their 6, 7, and 8 into a new charter. They have not yet started serving grade 6. So the split would happen concurrently with the serving of grade 6. So in other words, there would be no academic data for those students as 6th graders when the charter split happened in the latter case, whereas in the former case, you have historic data for the kids that were being split. So I spent a lot of time noodling over this to try to figure out run traps. I've talked to like 5 people at the Department of Education, including the Director of Accountability, Maggie Pano, Melissa Ombre, Andrew Bernlor, a bunch of other folks at DOE. And the conclusion is Maggie finally sent me an email basically detailing that this would not be an issue, but we're still have to work through the details. So what I am asking you all to do, the primary difference between this request and what happened with Phelan is that Phelan had a charter lying around, right? And that is a function of what happened in 2012 when the board granted him 10 charters. And so we have been over the years just activating those charters as he's needed a new charter. And he and Carpe Diem were the only 2 schools, I think also one of the early Excel centers. I think the Excel centers in the beginning got some charters, multiple charters as well. We've really stopped that practice. That really has not happened in the last 5 years, simply because it just doesn't, I don't know, it just doesn't feel right, I guess. Like if you're going to start a new school, you should file a charter application for a new school. So what we're proposing here is for the very rare case where an existing school that already has a charter that has already been approved for a certain grade span, that you give me the authority to grant approval for that split. There are 4 sort of caveats or 4 things that need to be met. 1, the grade span has to have been previously approved by you guys. So you've approved K-8 or you've approved K-12. The request has no other material change. Like they're not proposing to move to a different location. They're not proposing to add grade levels not previously proposed, right? So we're not asking to split charters and then move a school into a different building that's a quarter of a mile away, right? That we would bring to the board. This one is the trickiest one to explain, but what we would do is the initial term of any new charter agreement for a grade span would be equal to the remaining term of the current charter agreement. This is to prevent a school from basically getting a restart by requesting a split, right? So like if you're in year 3 of your charter and you want to split in year 4, that new charter will have a 1-year term. And then both charters will come up in that 5th year. So in other words, you don't get a 5-year pass by just splitting grades. Like we have data on you, we're gonna evaluate you based on the grades that have been around through the term of the initial charter agreement. So then when we get to renewal, we will renew them separately based on the appropriate metrics. So when they're renewed, they'll be renewed for separate terms. And then the last bit is, sort of part of the whole rule governing baseline accountability resets, which is that you can't use the split to avoid accountability for state, federal, or ICSB purposes, and that we will automatically deny any request that has that effect. One of the concerns that I had in reaching out to the Department of Education was because of the way that they do, it's historically, maybe it needed to happen, but it's not been, it's led to a lot of confusion because they tie so much relevance to school and corporation ID numbers. In other words, like a school's status is literally tied to whether or not they have a number. And a number is just a number, right? It should be the other way around. Like the school status should be driving whether a school qualifies for something or not. But in IDRE's system, if you don't have X number, you're not considered X. So if you don't have a school corporation number, you're not considered a school corporation, regardless of whether under Indiana law, you're actually considered a school corporation. And I can see Bridget can speak to this a little bit as well. And so our concern was whether or not from a DOE perspective, they would lose historical accountability if we did this. Because the only way that they can save data is to give one school corporation, and this is getting too technical, and maybe I should just stop talking about it and can answer specific questions if you have them. But basically, they say they can do it. And the only thing it will impact is the fact that the schools will no longer be treated as separate school corporations. Now, that should not affect federal funding, but that's something that we need to spend a little more time looking at. One thing it does not affect at all is their eligibility for the charter school grant, because the charter school grant definition is based on whether or not you are a charter school, not whether or not you're considered to be a separate LEA. Does that make sense? So it's different. Title I is based on whether or not you're an LEA. A school corporation is an LEA. The charter school grant is based on whether or not you're a charter school. That is a different definition. So that schools that split, like including the one that's going to split and be a completely new school, right, 6, 7, 8, they would be eligible for the charter school grant and any other grant that defines eligibility as being a charter school. So the reason that we don't want to bring this to the board is because the only other alternative is to make them file a new charter application for the new charter. And that just seems like a waste of everyone's time, because as a matter of law, this is a technicality. It's not changing anything. It's not changing the approval that you guys initially made. It's not changing the academic program. It's not changing where the school exists. All it is doing is changing the fact that certain grade spans will be under one charter and other grade spans will be under a different charter. It does change a little bit which accountability metrics we use to measure the school and which data we use, but it doesn't change the fact that we hold them accountable. So rather than bring these to the board for approval of a whole new charter that is essentially just reapproving a charter you've already approved and making them fill out an entire charter agreement, our proposal is that you give the executive director the authority to grant approvals to these splits under those conditions listed on page 1. And I will stop talking and take questions because this gets a little complicated.
Thanks, James. And thanks for diligently laying out the conditions. I think I probably speak for most board members in saying that those are critical to this decision.
Right.
So thank you for that. And I know you and I have already talked about it, so I don't have any further questions, but I'm sure others may.
So you want to say something, Dr. Calvin?
I saw it too.
I was thinking, you know what, James, while this sounds very simple, I appreciate the fact that you and someone thought through it, because I totally agree. Makes no sense to go through the entire process. And I would like to support your recommendation that's coming from the administration, that we hold you accountable. Is that a good way to say it? Or we give you the authority to oversee this? What was the
that you give the executive director the authority to approve these kinds of very specific requests,
right,
for these very specific conditions.
Right.
If any condition is not met, such as if it contains a request to move one of the grade spans to a new building, like a new location, like a new geographic area, that we bring it to the board for approval, because that's beyond just splitting. That's a material change. That would need to be an amendment.
I've been on the board for a couple of years, and is this the first time we've done this? That's the reason I spent so much time trying to understand it.
Yes, this has never come up before for us.
Well, I think it's the kind of work that should be done in the charter school movement. It gives us an opportunity to test and amend, adjust, and move forward, especially if it expedites the time and the paperwork.
And it has no material impact.
No.
I think that's the key.
No.
So when a school, I'm just trying to think through what currently we approve and don't approve. So if a school, for example, we've approved a charter where they have a particular academic approach using certain curricula, all of that, we approve it. If they change it midway through their first 5 years or whatever, they never come back to us for approval, right? I mean, that they can change that anytime they want. Am I correct on that? We never have to approve that.
Oh, Janet, that's just such a can of worms you just opened.
I
know. Here's the reality of the situation. I will say this meeting's already gone on too long, or gone on long enough, and this discussion could probably take up a lot of time. I have often believed, or I have come to believe, that our process, to a certain extent, of incorporating the original charter agreement into a charter and holding them accountable to their original charter agreement is not best practice.
Right.
Because we expect our schools to adapt to serve the demographic of the students that show up in their building.
Right.
And when you submit a charter application, you have no idea who's going to show up in your building. You have no idea what your SES is going to be. You have no idea what your minority population is going to be. You can guess, but you don't know for sure. You have no idea what your ELL population is going to be. There are all sorts of things that could cause you to have to adjust what you said in your charter application in order to provide the services to serve the kids that show up at your door. I mean, we're open enrollment schools. We don't get to choose who we serve.
That's right.
And so the issue I've always had, and this has sort of been, you're right, we don't require schools to come back to us. You know why? Because we would be spending 100% of our time trying to figure out whether what they just did was a change that needs to come back to the board.
Right.
You know what I mean? Now, like the pandemic is different, right? That was a complete change of mode and everything, right? So that required the board to sort of weigh in and say, yes, you can do this. You can go completely virtual, even though you've never been virtual before. But and the struggle is trying to figure out how to do this, how to handle this properly, how to acknowledge that schools evolve, and that if you look at what a school's doing now, particularly ones that have been renewed more than once, how that compared to maybe what they were doing 7 years ago, or even maybe that's not the best example, like a school that's in year 5 and then holding them accountable to what they submitted probably 7 years earlier just seems like a really, really bad policy. So that's my short answer on that. I know that's worth a lot more discussion, I think, about what we do about that. But that is something that we as a staff have been discussing, because it's ironic that we tell our schools you have to adjust to meet your students' needs, not the other way around. And at the same time, we're holding them accountable to what they said in a document that they submitted 2 years before they had any students.
But James, I do believe that that's why you're hired to work through this. You have spent far more time on this split issue than I would ever spend on it. And I've spent a lot of time trying to understand what you were saying. And I just hope that perhaps at the end of the year, or somewhere along the way, that you will report out how this is going, or how it's, what difficulties, or if there, what progress. I'd like to hear more about the model in terms of how it's being evaluated at some point, not next meeting, another next meeting, but at some point.
Well, and I'd be happy to do that. And honestly, our test case is, I think, still on the call. No, Earl was the first to get the split. And, he would be the one, because these two proposals wouldn't be they'd be for next year at the earliest. So, maybe in a year we'll ask Earl how things are going with the split, or maybe he wants to weigh in now and tell us how it's going.
It's going great because we were able to apply for a CSB grant and bring more resources to our scholars and families. So that was one benefit for sure. And that's the short version, but please reach out to me in a year as well.
Yeah, I think that you cannot discount that. The money is there. The CSP money is there. They're going to have money left over. And if it allows more schools access to more money, I'm all for it.
And it's just the blessing of having the resources to do the programming, right? So we're able to do a CTE program for our high school students, so they'll graduate with a diploma and a high demand credential that will get them into a job of $30,000 to $40,000 with just a high school degree and a credential. You can run other programming for scholars, from clubs to experiences. It's just been great to have the resources. Our scholars go through quite a bit. So to be able to hire extra counselors and to support our scholars with all the social emotional stuff that lives, that exists living on the Far East Side, it's just been an incredible blessing that you allowed us to split them and provide that for our scholars.
Well, that's what it's about. So what do we need to do? Do you need a motion? What do we do? An agreement? How is this going to work?
I just need your blessing, Dr. Calvin.
You have my blessings.
No, I think we actually need a vote. So
you need a vote?
Yeah.
Hey, James. James, I
Yes.
don't have an opposition to it. I don't have an issue. that authority over. I do have a couple of things that I'm hoping that you'll keep in mind, though. And one would be, you know, probably as much as anything, because of the incentive and need for the additional federal charter school expansion grants that Mr. Phelan highlighted. The concern that eventually there might be the incentive for schools to feel like they needed to split and then split and then split and then split, because that money can become so important to them, rather than, you know, working hard to build the model that can be self-sustaining for the future. And so I would assume at some point there's a limit to how much you want them to split. Obviously, for a K-12 to split to K-8 and 9-12, you know, that's the way schools operate anyway. But might there be an enrollment number below which this just wouldn't make sense for a school to do? Or might there be a number of grades within a certain school beyond which it wouldn't make sense for them to do? And then another caution I would have, because I've seen it in Indianapolis to a limited extent, but it still happens, is in an effort and desire to be able to market schools based upon some strength that can be found, even when maybe there's only a few strengths that can be found. I have seen a handful of schools who will market themselves as the top scoring I-STEP school, you know, among schools of our configuration or whatever, or our location, which might end up being a very odd configuration. You know, like maybe there aren't really many 7 through 9 schools, but they're the only one, so they are the top one, which becomes deceptive to parents. That's not happening very often, but it's happening sometimes. And those aren't the right incentives to adopt a certain grade configuration. So I would just say, you know, keep your ears open to that type of thing. So this becomes only a good thing and not a bad thing. And then the only last thing would be, I would hope that in some fashion, those decisions would be posted somewhere on the website so that so the public knows that they're happening. And aside from that, I think it makes perfect sense for staff to make those decisions.
And we'll obviously certainly notify the board as well. I have two quick comments. One, yes, this is not a carte blanche to split, you know, a K-12 into 12
right
individual grade schools just so they can get money. You know, we won't allow that to happen. They have to be, the splits have to make sense. They have to be at that sort of natural breakpoints, and they have to give us a reason, right? I mean, we're going to develop a formal process for them to submit a request, and the request has to make sense, right? The second thing I'll say is CSP is pretty much almost over, and we didn't reapply for the next round. So I think in the immediate future, and who knows what's going to happen under a Democratic administration. So in the immediate future, I'm not sure that you're going to see schools rushing to split simply to get CSP dollars, because there won't be any. But yeah, I mean, regardless, you know, I would hope that you all would realize that the decisions that we make as a staff are always made with what is in the best interest of the students, and with careful thought about the unforeseen consequences of such a decision. You may not agree with everything that we do, but you know, we truly do, you know, run everything to ground before we make a decision. Nothing is no decisions are made solely to expand charter schools or to suck more money into, you know, however you want to say it. I mean, we view each request independently, and it has to be in the best interest of the school. So. Virginia, Dr. Calvin, you're muted.
Good job. Keep rolling. I'll make it short.
So Dr. Calvin, I think you offered up a motion.
Yes, I did.
A motion to approve the staff's recommendation to allow for Indiana Charter School Board staff to grant approval for a request for charter split. Do I have a second for that motion?
I'll second.
Thanks, Jill. All right, so Dr. Calvin.
Yes.
Dylan.
Yes.
Goff.
I think she's muted.
Goff?
It's not letting me unmute her, so.
Well, this is a new one. Welcome to virtual meetings.
Yes. Chairperson James, if she sends like in the chat box, if she's not able to unmute herself.
Marianne may have an opinion on that. I think that probably satisfies the roll call because it's
James, I'm fine. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Maybe she needed to step away for a moment.
I think she,
Yeah. All right, we'll move on. Kramer.
Yes.
Ruger.
Yes.
Rummel.
Yes.
And Preston. Yes. So the motion passes.
Last thing. I'm not sure how many of you were around when we first brought this up. I think it was in 2017 or 2018. But this, and I put this in staff updates because it really wasn't relevant for today. But it's the whole ability. So Indiana law says that a charter can be between 3 and 7 years. We have historically always been 5 years. I have always believed that 5 years is too short. And there are some states that go 15, 25, 20 years, renewals for schools that are in good standing. So like if you've maybe made it through 2 renewals, your 3rd renewal, you get renewed for 15 years because again, why in the hell do we keep dragging you in front of the board when you're consistently meeting expectations? And so, we brought this up before, it sort of died, but it was brought in the middle of a recommendation discussion where we actually recommended a 7-year renewal and the board said no. And then, so we recommended 5 and that was approved. But I really would like for the board again to reconsider our ability to recommend 7-year renewals, particularly for schools that are really stable. Now I would just, for example, I would not have recommended 7-year renewals for, maybe 3 out of the 4 schools that were on the docket today, simply because, the additional monitoring required. But there are some schools that I would like to offer a 7-year renewal for when they come up, simply because they have never been a problem. They are meeting all of our standards. They are, it just doesn't make any sense to make them come back for 5 years. Now, to be honest with you, I would prefer initial charter applications to be given 7 years because 5 years gives us no time to do anything. And this year is absolutely the best example of that. ACE Prep has no data, none, right? 4.5 years in. And I think to myself, whenever I think about the idea that we're actually asking a school, why aren't you why aren't you able to do this, 90% proficiency after 4 years? And then I think to myself, well, I wonder how North Central's first 4 years went, right? I mean, it was probably a little rocky. Most public schools have been around forever, but I guarantee you that the public schools that exist now, the traditional public schools that exist now, probably had some rough years in year 1, 2, 3, and 4. So, it just sort of seems hypocritical that we're expecting, massive, expecting charter schools to do, have these massive improvements and be completely financially stable and, get all A grades and do all of this in 4.5 years. And so, that's my spiel on that. we don't need to take action on this today. I just wanted to bring it up. I mean, you can take action on it if you want, but it just is something that's always bothered me. And it wouldn't be automatic. Obviously, the board would still have to approve it specifically, but there it is.
Well, for the purpose of today's discussion, I know you feel passionately about initial charter approval, but if we could stick with renewal terms, we might be able to take action today. I think the really important piece of this is what you spelled out earlier, and I reiterated for the board. Whether it's a year or 100 years, staff is still closely monitoring each school, and at any time in their window of operation, we can take action. And I think that's the most important piece. So James, I'm open to the possibility of taking action today for extending that renewal from 5 to 7 years, but obviously want to open that up for board discussion.
Just to clarify, the request isn't to automatically make it 7 years. It has to be specifically recommended by staff and approved by the board.
I would like for that the number of years to, can you hear me now? I guess my viewpoint on is that I've always felt that as charters, that we should act on research in some manner. And I'm wondering, James, what do other states do? How did they derive at the number of years? Or maybe it's not important for the state of Indiana, but it would be nice for the staff to sincerely, in my opinion, to think about it, because I do agree and I'm willing to vote today, but I just wish we had something that could assist us in chartering our movements for the state of Indiana. How do we look with our surrounding states if that data is available?
Well, in the memo, we actually, I do cite to the most recent 50-state analysis I could find, which unfortunately was from January of 2018, where it says at least 11 states permit, including the District of Columbia, permit initial and renewal terms between 6 and 15 years. Another 6 states provide for an initial term of 5, but an extended term generally between 10 and 15 for schools who are in good standing. The mayor's office provides, provides for an initial charter term of 7 years, or at least can. And Ball State, and I just checked this like 2 days ago, has also begun to offer 7-year charter term renewals for certain schools based on stability. So it is not uncommon by any stretch of the imagination. I know that there are some states, I think New York, you can get like a 20-year renewal.
Too long.
Well, but for those states, a lot of it has to do with financing. You know, if you're going to get a 30-year bond issue on a 5-year charter, so you know, but again, these long renewals or extensions or terms are generally extended to schools that are stable and have been stable for a number of years.
With that said, what is your recommendation then?
Recommendation, taking
the number of years.
Kim's note into account, is that the recommendation be that we're permitted to bring to you 7-year renewal. We are permitted to ask you for 7-year renewals for certain schools. And then, of course, or 5 years. And the board, of course, would have to approve a 7-year renewal. They could decline to renew for 7 and renew for 5 instead, or whatever. But what it does do is allow us to actually say, we would like to renew this particular school for 7 years because of X, Y, and Z.
Okay.
And then we can address new schools later.
Well, we can, I'm in support of that, and I'm in support of the chair attempting to get a vote today. However she decides to move with this. I can't see her, but.
Thanks, Dr. Calvin.
So you're basically asking us to give the scope of what the state law allows.
Right.
And then that's what
Yes.
Ball State and the mayor's office
do.
Right.
Yes, and the reason
Okay.
that I'm bringing it up again is because it came up a couple of years ago and was like denied.
Yeah.
So I felt obligated to bring it up again to get approval before I feel comfortable bringing it up again, if that makes sense.
Other discussion?
I'm sorry, I intervened and someone was speaking.
Any other questions or discussion from the board? Okay. I would then entertain a motion to accept staff's recommendation to allow for the possibility of a 7-year renewal.
So move. So move.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Great. Dr. Calvin,
Yes.
Dylan,
Yes.
Goff. I think maybe her internet is still causing her.
Nikki, did you
she's
see her comments in the chat? Okay.
Yeah, she's
Yeah.
responded in chat and sent an email. So,
Jill, if you want to weigh in the chat, you could cast your vote there to the group.
Chairperson, I believe she might just be still rebooting.
Okay. Kramer,
Yes.
Ruger,
No.
Rummel,
Yes.
and Preston, yes, so motion passes. Great.
that's all I have, I
James?
believe. Unless Nikki has any house cleaning.
Not at this time. I believe we have a proposed timeline, but we haven't discussed it internally yet. So
Good.
Okay, if there's nothing else from staff or members of the board, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
That's the
Not
one you
everyone
named
all
the
at once. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, staff.
Everyone.
Have a wonderful
Holidays to everyone.
Yes.
Well, too.
Bye.
Bye.
bye-bye.